17th committee meeting. Notice of time and place of these committee meetings was publicized by notifying the area news media, by updating OPPD website, and by mailing such notice to each of the district directors on May 9th, 2018. If Mr. Burke could give us the safety briefing.
I would love to welcome. You're on the 9th floor on the west side of Energy Plaza. If we need to exit this building or room, we would exit through the elevators all the way down to the main level and exit out of the building on the 17th Street side of the building. In the event of a fire, we would not use the elevators, we would use the steps and exit on the 17th Street side as well. Fire extinguisher is right behind us, the AED and the first aid kit are to the right of the elevators, just outside this door. The restrooms are down at the end of the hallway as well. If you have a medical condition, please write it down or tell your neighbor.
Certified in the use of an AED or in CPR? All right, very good. Yeah.
Oh, I think you can.
Yeah, I think we are. I think we are. Well practiced, I think, so that's good. Is there any questions to the safety briefing? I believe someone from our security staff will call 911 in the event that we need that. And if not, Kevin, could I have you do that? Okay, sounds good. I appreciate that. And that concludes my safety briefing.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, we'll have the I should mention that our chairman was asked to call to duty today as far as extra security with the polling at the polling stations. So that is why he is not here today. Next, we'll have the financial report, and Mr. Mines.
Javier?
It's me. Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to present the April 2018 financial report. The story for April is that it was a pretty quiet month. Revenues, and I'll talk about this in just a minute, revenues pretty much as expected, expenditures pretty much as expected. Off-system sales and purchases are now trending back to normal. So let me go dive into each one of these categories. On the revenue side, retail revenues for April were $65.4 million. This is $3.7 million under budget, and when I say that revenues are coming in as expected, it says $3.7 million under budget. Most of this is due to unbilled accruals, revenues that we will bill and accrue in different months. This is very likely to reverse itself in May. It's the same effect that I reported back in February that was reversed in March. April reversing, very likely to reverse in May. So I'm not concerned on the revenue piece. I think we're hitting our budget on target. Heating degree days and cooling degree days have been pretty much on budget, very close to average. So that tells me that we're selling the same amount of electricity as we budgeted for. Off-system sales revenues for April were $15.4 million. This is $3.2 million over budget on the sales side. Other income, we continue to experience losses on the other income side, and these are losses. So other income for April was $2.1 million, which is $2.9 million under budget, mostly explained by continued rising of interest rates, which erodes the mark-to-market value of a lot of our investments on an accrual basis. But as I've mentioned before, our strategy is by and large a buy and hold strategy. So these are accrual losses. I do not expect them necessarily to realize as real cash losses when we hold those securities to maturity. O&M expenses, excluding fuel and purchase power for April, were $27 million, which is $200,000 under budget. So still in the right direction. We continue to meet our budget or exceed expectations for our budget. We continue to spend less than our budget. The story here is it's not the same as last year. Last year, every month I would come here and I would say, hey, our O&M expenses are significantly under budget. We were in the middle of custom process improvement initiatives. What's happening this year is last year we tightened the budget even more. which makes it harder for us to continue to beat the budget by that much. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. We're now budgeting closer to those actuals. Very important that we're not exceeding that budget piece, but coming in under budget is not as the order of magnitude is not the same as last year. Fuel and purchase power, total fuel and purchase power expenses for April were $28.3 million, which is $2.5 million over budget. If you recall, off-system sales were $3.2 million over budget. Power purchases were $2.5 million over budget. So this month, compared to budget, we sold more power than we purchased. Power compared to budget, not in aggregate. It'll be very interesting. I'm probably starting in May for the May report we do in June and July. We'll probably be focusing a lot more on these two areas as the heating season ramps up. Other expenses pretty much in line, $34.4 million, which is $400,000 over budget, pretty much in line. Year to date, we're $1 million under budget on that category. All in all, this adds up to a net income for April, which is a loss of $6.7 million, which is $6.2 million under budget. The majority of this is explained by the loss on mark-to-market investments and the unbilled accruals, which, again, it doesn't cause me a lot of concern. I believe that this it's not a systemic issue here. Still, our net income for 2018 at the end of the year, we're budgeted to be at $79.6 million. I believe that we still have a fairly decent chance to reach that budget. On the capital side, capital expenditures for April were $8.5 million, which is $3.4 million under budget. This is one area where, as the weather improves and we're out of the winter storm season, but going into the summer storm season, this is when we're expecting to see capital projects to start to pick up as our crews have a little bit more time to work on those. We still underspent compared to April, and we will continue to monitor and report that to the board going forward. Year to date, capital expenditures are $33.5 million, which we are still year to date $8.5 million under budget. So this is an area of focus for all management to make sure that we are executing our projects as planned, or that we're achieving savings. Maybe there's a combination of both. On the cash side, as I explained earlier, some of the losses that I reported are non-cash losses, which is one of the reasons why it explains that our unrestricted cash balance at the end of April was $403.2 million, which is $80 million over budget. We ended the year last year with significantly more cash than we expected, and that was not part of the budget. So from a cash perspective, we're in a solid, positive cash position. And that concludes my report. Happy to answer any questions.
May I make this just kind of a cosmetic suggestion?
Yes.
When I read the statements online, at the very least, drop the pennies off everything, but I would prefer if you truncate to the nearest thousands and do your statements in thousands. It's just easier to read. Right now, it carries everything all the way out to cents, and it's such a big business, I would just do it all in thousands.
The reports, okay.
All your financial statements.
Okay.
Yeah. It'd just be easier to read for all of us, I think.
Thank you.
Sure.
Sounds good. Okay.
Okay.
That's it.
Should we move on to the next item?
Legal?
Legal fees and expenses. Okay. So for legal fees, we have the report for the first quarter of 2018. Legal fees and expenses paid to General Counsel Fraser Stryker total $445,000 and change, $445,101.15, which includes services for contracts, regulatory transmission issues, environmental regulations, claims, settlements, general labor and benefit supports, and litigation. It's basically business as usual, except that I believe that in Q1 we had a slightly higher activity with General Counsel, and so the $445,000 compares to a $329,000 last year on Q1. Not a huge deviation, and I think it's just depending on the year, the topics that come to us, and we use Fraser Stryker more or less depending on the quarter, but not a big significant deviation that is worth, in my opinion, pointing out. The other piece is legal fees and expenses paid to special counsel Troutman Sanders were $21,000 for FERC monitoring and counsel. Again, pretty much in line. We've reviewed all the reports, and I'm comfortable with those amounts.
And I don't have any problem with it at all, but just again for the public record, how we go about using the attorney, and then when we gotta have to go out and they need someone else on a specialty like FERC. But Tim, is that all department heads have that choice and then it runs by you, or how's that work?
So the way it works is that the executives have accountability for their business unit. Mm-hmm. And so specifically you will see items like, and Steve, you can jump into FERC, NRC, very specific groups that deal in that every single day. Steve obviously is involved with FERC as well, certainly in some other work that he does on the gas side, but on the electric side as well. This is kind of unique stuff we're doing with FERC on some filings that we've done and some work that we've done with them over the course of the last several months. So,
and I'm always consulted in that process, and then in addition, at the direction of Tim, I do review all of the invoices that come in from outside firms as well, sort of a check and balance kind of a thing.
Right.
And then the senior team reviews the specific allocations that are coming from Fraser Stryker to make sure that they're in line, and then we report on them. As
and
we
sometimes things come up, you don't know what's going to come up in the legal world. I get that. I think, and like I say, I have no qualms about it. I think just we review these publicly. I always wanted to throw it out there every now and then, remind the public of what we're doing here and why.
Yeah, I think a couple items that have kind of popped up on here is that you know, we've done some work with on the community solar side. We've done some work on the wind contract side. The board will be hearing about that in closed session and kind of where that status is and some of the work that's been going on there. So that's part of the work that's been going. There has been some claims. You'll be hearing about that in a little bit from Kevin. And so and then some has been on a variety of the transmission related issues that we've been dealing with NERC on and SPP on and others. So
it's been a busy quarter. Moving the bottom line.
Thank you.
There are no other questions. I can go to the next topic, which is the retirement plan for the report for the first quarter of 2018. Before I go into the report, I want to just follow up on a conversation we had a month or two ago on the retirement plan. Our actuarial firm that contracts with us is planning to have their evaluation report as of January 1, 2018, done later this summer. We believe it's going to be in the July-August timeframe. We've asked them, and we're coordinating with them to have them come to the board and do an education on to answer some of the questions Director Trinan and others had on the amortization periods, funding, progress, what is our target, and things like that. So we're planning on doing that later this summer. The report for the first quarter of 2018, not great, but not as bad as it could have been. As you all probably saw in the news, we had big market corrections, market downturns in January, a few of them again in February. The quarterly return for our pension plan for 2018, the first quarter of 2018 was 20 basis points, positive. That's important. It hasn't always been the case. 0.2%, that's what our plan earned the first quarter. We benchmark against indices. The average of that index that we're benchmarking would have lost 30 basis points, would have been minus 0.30%. So our plan overperformed over the index by 50 basis points, which is phenomenal. I think this is something that our managers are doing a really, really good job. But there's only so much you can do when you have a market that's going in the wrong direction. Still, the retirement plan fund market value at the end of the first quarter was $1.014 billion. This compares to the market value at the beginning of the quarter of $1.021 billion. So we lost value slightly, but I was expecting for the value to increase if we are to keep with the 7% required increase. So we'll continue to monitor this and report back to the board. Last year was a phenomenal year. If you remember, the annualized returns were in excess of 16%. This year we have a soft start of the year, and so we're capitalizing on last year's gains as well.
I think year to date, though, now the market has moved into positive territory.
Right, right. So I
Not too
didn't want to say that. I didn't want to jinx us. So
I'll jinx us.
You're on the hook for that one.
It's primary day. I can jinx it.
This is the first time we've actually gotten a report on the private real estate value, and it's interesting that really did help us out quite a bit.
and that was exactly designed for that. It was
21
designed
basis
to
points.
offset when other asset categories have a downturn. Usually, real estate is the opposite, and they correlate negatively. So it is working the way it's intended.
It's worked well, that
Right.
diverse portfolio, yes.
Right.
Javier, the benefits payments, are those fairly steady from one quarter to the next?
Yep. Yeah, they're pretty steady, and they're in line with what we're expecting.
Okay.
As our contributions. The one thing that's not steady are earnings,
Market, right.
and that's what I'm focusing.
Yeah, so like last quarter, the employees paid $2.6 million
Correct.
into it, and OPPD paid $13.7 million into it,
Correct.
and we paid out in pension benefits $23.9 million.
Right. So we're paying out more than what our employees and OPPD is contributing, and that's by design because on average, market earnings make up the difference. Except this quarter, that was not the case, and that's why the fund
Right.
lost value. When earnings are higher than what we are assuming,
Then
the
we'll be
opposite
okay.
is true as well. There are no more questions. I think the last topic is on Mr. McCormick.
I'm going to ask Kevin McCormick come up. This is part of our requirement to essentially report any settlement of claims in excess of $50,000. So Kevin is our Director of Corporate Safety and Technical Training, also has the accountability to really administer our work comp program and work around that. So Kevin, I'll let you explain maybe a little bit about what you do and then a little about specifically about this claim.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Like Tim said, I'm here to talk about or report a settlement of a claim in excess of $50,000. We had an employee back in January 2014 working on a locomotive, and they were spraying stuff on the motor to get it clean, and it flashed. He had eye injuries. He was wearing eye protection at the time, but it still got under his glasses, and through a series of doctors and things like that, we estimate this claim to be could be potentially in excess of $800,000. And so, along with Fraser Stryker and myself, we determined we should probably do it in mediation rather than trial. And through mediation, we settled this for $260,000. And again, I think that's a win for OPPD in a way that I think the liability could have been much greater.
It's still a benefit for the employee.
Exactly.
Have we reviewed that PPE to see if there's a better type of goggle? I mean, we had lots of objects, foreign objects in eyes, and we found better sealing glasses and other PPE shields and other things that would prevent that from happening.
Yeah, so basically this employee just had the regular safety glasses with nothing going
gap.
out, and now we supply those.
Okay. Do we require them?
It depends on the job they're doing.
Okay.
Is the guy, was the gentleman, was he blind, or what's the final, how's his condition?
He is going to be suffering eye injuries the rest of his life. He's having some retina issues in both eyes.
How old of a person?
He's in his 30s.
Okay.
He's had multiple eye surgeries in
That's
this process, and I think the complication with this case was his other eye is having some difficulty, and whether it's related or not related, you kind of had doctors on both sides saying it's not related and some saying it's related, and our recommendation was to go ahead, and Kevin and Fraser Stryker were involved in calling me. Part of our BL, we have the ability to have that discussion and then work on the settlement. We felt the settlement was really in the best interest of all ratepayers, but also it was something that the employee and his counsel also agreed to as well. So they were satisfied with the resolution as well.
I can also say in the 10 years that I've been overseeing work comp, we don't see cases like this. I had one other one about 5 years ago that was $85,000, and these are the only two we've had that went over the $50,000 limit.
So going forward, is he still under our company insurance, or do we cut him loose?
So this particular employee decided to leave the company on his own after the incident, and so he's no longer an employee, so he's out on his own.
Oh, shoot. Okay.
Okay.
That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll have nuclear. Mr. Barrett.
All right, I'm going to pass it on to Mary Fisher.
I'd like to give the report from the Nuclear Oversight Committee. First item I'd like to discuss is the continuation of the topic that we discussed last month, that we met on April 7th, the decay in the energy of the spent fuel that allowed us to downgrade several things. One was our emergency plan, and the other was our physical security plan to be commensurate with decommissioning plants. Today I'd like to let you know that we have completed the implementation of both of those programs, and so we are now in a realm of being consistent with the status of the plant in both of those areas. Also, the physical work associated with dry storage project continues. I meant to have some photographs today, as I did last time, but didn't have the time to work through getting released from the company that's doing the work. So next time I'll have some photos. They've made a lot of progress, and I believe this week are starting to pour concrete for those horizontal storage modules. So moving along very quickly. And as I said, next time I'll have some pictures for you that will show you the progress that's being made. And then design license basis reconstitution program. This program had been out there for a number of years, and as we went into decommissioning, we anticipated that we would do one of two things. One was to modify the plant, the other one was to continue with this program. At the end of the day, we decided that continuing with this program and making the design license basis commensurate with the decommissioning plant was the best avenue. So I'd like to report that that's also completed, and we submitted into the NRC yet this month, or excuse me, last month it went in as being completed.
This is actually a big thing.
It is a big thing.
The design license basis. Can you explain to some of the new people here exactly what it is and what the importance is, why we did complete this as far as our historical data?
So what this does is this is the design basis document that tells us exactly how the plant is configured and how it should be configured for safety purposes, how it should be configured for engineering purposes. And as you make changes to the plant, you go through and you update this continuously. What we found out years ago was that the paperwork was not being kept up as it should have been. And so the NRC came in and said, you need to put this program in place. So they've been working on it for a number of years, probably 5 years or more. And so this is a big deal to have this completely done. As we got into decommissioning, a lot of the systems, as we've talked about before, that we've abandoned in place or no longer need, this needed to be redone again in order to make sure that the basis was as it is currently configured. And so to have this complete, we felt was the best avenue, and the NRC agreed with that. So that is into them, and they will be reviewing it.
And they still have to okay it, is that correct?
They'll
How do
look
they
at
do
it, review it, they'll spot check it and inspect it. I don't expect any approval on this, but they will come in and inspect
They will
against the
inspect.
basis to ensure that we've done it properly.
Okay.
So Mary, it says the scope was modified to include only those systems used to ensure cooling of
Correct.
spent fuel. So could we then say, if we're not operating the plant, do we just kind of shelf the rest of it?
So there are.
So that kind of narrows it down a lot.
It-
Not to take anything away from what
It
you're doing,
did,
because that's a
yes.
great deal. But you're just looking at the cooling aspect of the
We're looking at the
spent fuel.
safety aspect
Oh,
of the
okay.
systems that
Of
are
how it's
still
gonna
needed
work.
for cooling, yes. And so there are a number of systems that we still need out there. I think we've abandoned, and I'm going to remember numbers, so
Yeah.
please don't quote me on them, but there's probably 50 to 60 systems that we still need to
Yeah.
operate in order for cooling.
Will that be continual probably?
And they will be
as long as
continual
we're
until
out
the
there?
fuel is put out onto the
In the,
SPC pad.
in the spent
Into
fuel?
dry casts, yes. So we'll need those until we get all of the fuel out of the spent fuel pool.
Which will be in about 2 years.
It is projected to be done in 2020, correct?
Mary, I have one quick question. How about the number of full-time employees currently?
I will get to that.
If I jumped ahead,
No,
I just wanted to.
That's fine, I do have it right
Okay.
here. We are currently at 343 employees. We project that by the end of July, we'll be down to 338. Our projections for this year will be at 340, so we're meeting those numbers.
Okay. And how about the Missouri River levels?
Missouri River levels had been coming up. I don't have the level currently, but I do know it's stabilized and is not continuing to go up. As I saw it this morning, it was stable for the last 2 or 3 days. So I can get that number if you.
All right, no, I'm just.
63,000. Russ, what's the level that they increased the Gavin's Point?
So they actually reduced, they reduced flow out of Gavin's Point because there was a fatality up in the reservoir system. They were trying to recover the person from the reservoir. This was late last week. So they had reduced flow out of Gavin's Point so that they could get in and do that. Then they were gonna once they had recovered the deceased person, they were gonna raise the flow again. So it's been holding relatively constant since like end of March right now, and we don't see a lot of problems for precipitation or anything.
Hey, Russ, I have a quick question. This is kind of historical. Was there a huge rain event in 2011 that caused the flooding?
There was one that contributed at the end of May, just before Memorial Day. They had about 8 to 10 inches of rain that fell up across North and South Dakota and into Montana. And that, with the snow melt that they were getting out of the mountains, combined for an overabundance of water that they collected in the reservoir system during 2011.
Okay.
And if you want the actual number, I can look it up here. I just don't have it.
No, I'm.
Mary, I get the sense that we're ahead of schedule and under budget, but it would be helpful, just based on the enormity of this decommissioning effort. And I don't need to see it monthly, but just a little briefing on maybe a quarterly basis as to where we are time-wise against the original proposal for decommissioning and where we are dollar-wise against that, and kind of projected forward where we should end up, where our best thinking is. It helped me get my arms around the scope of it.
Okay.
Because I have a general sense, but I don't have any facts.
We do have a report that I get monthly on parameters. I have seen that. We are, in most of our projects ahead of schedule. There are some where we're on schedule. We do it on a project-by-project basis, so from a programmatic perspective, we're looking at all of the projects that we're working on, whether that be the fire protection program or reduction of electric a footprint within the plant, or system abandonment. We look at all of those on a monthly basis. We are under budget currently for the year. Part of that is really around timing in terms of radioactive waste disposal shipments, and we time those based on several different things. We look at weather, we also look at availability, we look at a number of different things, which on a month-to-month basis we'll move those around as necessary. But in generally speaking, yes, we are either on schedule, under, or ahead of schedule, and under budget for those activities.
So far, so good. You've done a great job, the whole team up there.
Thank you.
On time, under
At
budget.
Nebraska City on Monday, the river level was 912 feet.
Context, what does that mean?
It means that the river level is about where we would expect it for this time of year.
Okay.
We actually met with the Corps of Engineers, so Lisa and I, Russ, Mary, did anybody else? I think that was it. The four of us met with the Corps of Engineers. We do that typically on an annual basis before the spring runoff. One, just to get a sense, are there issues, items that we need to pay attention to? Are there other operational things that would impact us? Not only more water than we would want, but even less water than we need is critical, right? So we want to make sure that they don't reduce the flow, so that would actually reduce the cooling capability of our plants and lessen the availability of our capacity and energy from the plants on the river. And so we have a great relationship with the Corps, and it's a great kind of back and forth conversation that we have with them. So we're probably going to bring them in on some of our operations, some of our energy control work, and let them see what we do and how we do it on our generation side.
And they also had a turnover with a new colonel as well, so, and is very interested in utility business.
Well, that's good.
Mm-hmm.
I think his
Very knowledgeable.
We need
Moore
that.
College master's program was on energy, so he was very in tuned with it. So
That's good. Very intuitive.
How frequently does that position turn over?
every
Roughly.
2 to 3 years,
Yeah.
that kind
Okay.
of is a typical military officer kind of turn. That's what you'll see.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay.
Mary, this might be a question for Russ, I don't know, but there was a decision of sorts that the Corps in 2011 reacted more toward environmental considerations than the property owners' considerations. And there was, again, a recent decision by a board of some kind to say, listen, you need to rethink this. How does that affect us going forward?
I think there were damages paid to some farmers.
I think there was a settlement. It may have been a lawsuit. Russ, can you? Thank you.
Again, thank you, Director Mines, for that. There was litigation involved, and the way that I understand it, after the flood, the Corps of Engineers worked along the river, and in some of the floodplain areas that were heavily damaged, they ended up purchasing the property using eminent domain to remove people out of those areas. And that was the source of the litigation that's now moving through the court system, that they claim it was unlawful that the Corps would do that under eminent domain and take that property. So it's not how they managed it, it's what they did with the property areas that were impacted afterwards. It should have no impact on OPPD operations or any of our property, as far as I know.
But the core operations will remain the same. I mean, it didn't change the way they do business on releasing water. Okay, I misunderstood.
That's correct, Director Mines. They operate off of their water control manual that goes through a vetting process with public input. Had completed a 13-year process back in the 90s, going through that and having the master water control manual approved. And so they really are statutorily directed to follow that plan and make any adjustments if they need to. And at that time, they didn't see that there was any adjustments that they needed to make.
That's great.
It's a very complex thing,
Yeah, it
because
really
you've
is.
got, 5 dams north of here, with reservoirs and everything, and you don't want to have any of those dams breach because of too much load.
I might add, Director Mines, I know what you're thinking of. And a few years ago, there was a United States Supreme Court decision that found that the Corps of Engineers' action in breaching a levee down in the St. Louis, south of St. Louis area was what lawyers will call a regulatory taking. And that's a kind of a new strain in the law that does create higher risk for the Corps of Engineers management, including the management via the master manual. So you're right on track with what you're recalling. And they're well aware of that, and it does create opportunities when the Corps of Engineers ends up appropriating property for a public action. Is sort of that's where the law is going. It still hasn't been sorted out entirely, but it's kind of a new strain in the law.
Thank you. Thank you.
If I may move on, unless there's other questions. I do have the nuclear oversight auditing report as well. So nuclear oversight has moved to a program where they do a much broader look at the activities that are going on at the plant, as well as an in-depth, and so their audits are taking months to do now instead of weeks. And so I'd like to report on an internal audit that they did. They did maintenance, chemistry, radioactive waste, effluent, environmental monitoring, engineering programs, and station blackout as one audit. So there was a lot of different areas that they looked at. It did take a couple of months for them to get through this audit. The results of the audit were 1 finding, 10 deficiency, and 5 enhancements, which given the breadth of that doesn't really surprise me. And actually I was pleased that it came out that way. The one finding that I'll talk about is a training and qualification audit template. And if you recall, at the end of last year, we moved from Exelon operational procedures into Fort Calhoun procedures. As part of that procedural changeover, the guidance that we had put in one of the procedures didn't distinguish between using a crane cab versus a remote controlled belly box for crane operations. And because of that, they had a finding. So we're going back in and changing that procedure to be more specific. Qualifications for a crane cab are very different than controlled belly boxes. And so we just need to be specific in that. And so we'll go back and make those changes. In terms of the others, I would say most of those are just minor things that we need to go in and take care of in terms of the deficiencies. They also are doing a surveillance and are particularly paying attention to the dry cast storage project. They are overseeing the construction and receipt of components for the dry fuel storage, and they've had 3 surveillance plans associated with that, so paying particular attention to that. The one other item that I will mention is that they did go out and visit Ceradyne in Canada, which is the vendor that supplies some of the equipment to Orano for our dry cast storage. So they're going at least to the vendors that are supplying some of this as well. And then they also did go to the parent. They did go to Orano, and they did look at the activity that's going there in regards to the components that they're providing for our dry fuel storage as well. So we are paying particular attention to that project, given the nature of that project and the fact that we want to make sure that everything goes flawlessly. So that's it. It's my report, unless there's questions.
We're actually going in and watching them manufacture these things.
We are.
Yeah, cool. Great.
And we're looking at their quality assurance programs
Sure.
to make sure that they're in tune with what we need from our perspective.
Great.
Can you explain the makeup of the Nuclear Oversight Committee now? How many, who's overseeing it now, and how many people are underneath? We used to have John Hanson here giving the report, sort of overseeing, but we've changed that a little bit. If you can explain to everybody.
Right. As I got promoted to a vice president, we put Tim Euling in as the senior director of decommissioning. Because I have that separation, I now have the Nuclear Oversight Audit Committee reporting to me directly. One of the things that we'll do eventually is that we'll move that over to another vice president or another person on the executive team. But at this point in time, there's enough activity going on there that we wanted to make sure that we maintain the focus on this. So Randy Hugenroth was reporting directly to John Hanson to give those reports. I meet with Randy monthly to make sure that he's keeping his separation and that we're doing the things that we need to do. I will tell you that he's definitely maintaining that separation the way that we need to. And things get reported to me that then Tim Euling and I have a discussion about. So I feel very confident that we are maintaining that separation.
I will tell you that when I had the opportunity to meet with the DOC and talked about the transition, about the work that we're doing, and again, it's different from an operating unit than a decommissioning unit in the manner in where we are with the unit, and the DOC did not see any concerns or issues in the immediate future with that. But I think the other value and benefit, as Mary and I have talked, is another senior manager to have some of that exposure and experience too. So I think it carries over some interesting oversight practices that we might use in other parts of our business.
Mm-hmm. And how many people are on the oversight team underneath Randy right now?
Underneath Randy, I don't know. I would say maybe 5.
Okay.
Sorry, still learning acronyms, DOC?
Yeah, Decommissioning Oversight Committee.
Okay.
Yeah.
Stand corrected.
We should get rid of all acronyms. Is that complete?
Mary, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Next, we have the Public Information Committee meeting. The community solar update is going to be in closed session because that's not quite complete yet as far as negotiations, contract negotiations. And then next, we have the SD2 rates monitoring report. And Javier, would you like to give that, please?
I don't know if we have it.
I hope so.
Seems like I was up here not that long ago giving another monitoring report. So this is on our Strategic Directive 2 rates. This is the strategic directive that the board recently, within the past 6 months, revised. And so what I'm going to report today is on that new strategic directive with the new language. Starting with the title, now it's rates. The strategic directive basically says the board of directors shall establish a rate target of no general rate increases for a 5-year period starting in 2017, ending in 2021, with a directional rate target of 20% below the West North Central regional average, published rates on a system average basis. That's a really long sentence, but really, really important and core to everything we do here at OPPD. So I'm happy, I'm proud to report that for the 2nd year in a row, we are holding to the no general rate increase commitment. So we started, the first year was 2017, the second year is 2018, January 1 through December 31st of 2018, of a no general rate increase. So we are making that promise. How are we going on the directional target of 20%? I'm going to go into that in a little bit, and I'm going to talk about the limitations we have when we're comparing our competitiveness and time-wise, but I'll go into that in a little bit. In implementing this rate target, OPPD shall adhere to these principles. There are 6 principles. Maintain fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory rates, as stated in Nebraska Revised Statute 70-655. Equitably assign costs across and within all customer classes. Monitor affordability indicators is a new principle that the board added last time. Pursue rate process and structure changes to reflect the cost of energy when it is used. Offer flexibility and options, and be simple and easy to understand. So I'm going to walk through, in addition to demonstrating that we haven't had a general rate increase, I'm going to walk through those 6 principles on how we are contributing to those principles. Very important is, just to set the stage, we are using, when comparing OPPD to the regional rates or the regional prices, we're using information from the Energy Information Administration, the EIA, which categorizes the country in different regions. OPPD is located in the EIA West North Central region, and as the board stated in the Strategic Directive 2, we are comparing ourselves to that North Central region, which includes the states of North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, Kansas, and Nebraska. Basically a vertical slice of the country, which sort of also aligns, not perfectly, but aligns with a little bit with the SPP footprint as well. Not perfectly, of course, but. To provide some context, the team provided a graph of our historic rates as they compare to the regional average. That is shown in the burgundy line all the way back from 1995 to 2016. Let me make a pause here and talk about the 2016 number. This is really, really important. Unfortunately, as we compare ourselves to regional averages, we are dependent on information gathered by the EIA. That information lags its natural process. They take some time to compile all that information, review it, go through their vetting process, and they eventually publish that information. But that information is usually published about 18 to 24 months behind schedule. So right now, today, the latest information we have to compare ourselves to the regional average is from 2016. This is one of the reasons why we presented the proposal to the board, and the board approved the revision to Strategic Directive 2 to say our objective is what can we do today, which is keep rates at an original rate increase. And then we'll check ourselves as time goes by how we did compared to the regional average, but knowing that this is a lagging indicator, very much lagging, 24 months behind, versus a current indicator, which is the original rate increase. So the most recent information is as of 2016. You can see that our rates compared to the regional average have varied anywhere between 6% below the regional average to 14% below the regional average. Many things have happened in the past. You can see the blue line represent off-system prices. The market has changed significantly. And off-system prices, you can see them on the right axis. Please note that the axis is inverted, so a lower position in the graph means higher market prices. So you can see that we reached the highest market prices on the graph in the 2005-2006 time frame. We were doing really well. We were long power, we were selling a lot of power in the market, and we were supplementing our rates with those earnings. That partially contributed to our lower rates, and you can see the trend of rates going down all the way to 2008, where we reached our best year compared to the regional average of 14% below. Market prices, off-system prices, then have continued to decline since 2005-2006. A number of factors included in there, but probably one of the most important factors in there is natural gas prices. With the advent of fracking technology and storage technology for gas, market prices, off-system prices have continued to decline, making our excess power less valuable in the market. I'm paraphrasing and I'm generalizing a lot here, but it's just to follow the story here. That, in conjunction with a few major events that happened at OPPD, contributed to the deterioration, if you will, of our competitiveness, going from negative 14% below the regional average, to 7.1% below the regional average that we have as of 2016. We're still below the regional average, but not as below as we were back in 2008. Those 5 events are listed up on the top. Major events, the NC2 construction, which happened in the late, between 2007 and 2010. We had the recession that hit the nation, where the board made a commitment to try to keep rates from increasing too much while we were in the middle of recession. We had inflationary pressures as well. We had 2 main points of negotiation of coal transportation contracts that contributed to rate increases in those specific years. We had the flood. We were just talking about the flood in 2011. Not only the flood, but the effects of recovering from the flood and those investments we had to make to bring the plant back online. And as I mentioned earlier, the declining market prices that we have seen across the nation, starting in the 2008 timeframe and still to date. This is a very broad view of what's happened in the market. Again, I'm generalizing a lot here, but it explains a little bit of why we've had some of the rate increases when we've had to make investments, when we've had to supplement what otherwise would have been supplemented with off-system sales, now with rate increases. So it's been a combination of things that have explained our movement from 14% below the regional average to 7.1% below the regional average. What you do not see in this graph, and this is the unfortunate side of the lagging indicator, you do not see the effects of the 2017 no general rate increase. You do not see the effects of the 2018 no general rate increase. So time will tell. Later this year, I believe in the fall of 2018, we should get 2017 data and so forth. So I believe that by holding our rates flat, which is a gigantic effort by the organization, we are basically fighting inflation. We're eating inflation into our business, and that should help bring that regional average down. What other utilities do around us, there's not much we can control. I expect some of this pressure might increase because we had the changes in the tax reform happening earlier this year. So IOUs, investor-owned utilities, all of a sudden may be more competitive, and they have been forced or encouraged by the regulators to give back in the form of rate decreases. So it's going to make our competitiveness harder to. It's going to be harder to achieve the 20%. But I believe we're doing everything we can to keep that no general rate increase, and I believe that time should prove that strategy will improve that 7.1% under the regional average to something much, much better. Again, directionally, we're still challenging the organization to be at 20% below that regional average.
So can I ask a couple questions?
Yeah.
First, when is our next coal transportation contract up?
I think it's 5 more years or something. It was a 7-year contract. I think it's like.
I want to say it's 2020.
2020?
It ends 2020.
Ends 2020, so so that'll be a potential risk.
Well, or opportunity. You don't know if it's a risk or opportunity, right?
It could be both,
current
right?
coal prices, right?
Yeah.
So what we do typically is that we may firm up an extent of that contract, but a lot of it is in the spot market where we take advantage of lower spot market prices. And I think we've seen that over the course of the last several years very clearly. So it could be an opportunity as well.
I would
Sure.
say this year we're buying more on the spot market because of the prices being lower than the firm. And so we see that continuing.
Okay. I just want to make sure I understand a couple things about the graph. So declining market prices, that's really a measurement of your off-system prices, is that right? Is that
Correct.
Really what we're talking about? So those, in reality, go back to 2005, which is when you hit your high in the trend, if you just kind of drew a trend line from there. So that it goes back even further, which is interesting. I also think just in terms of observation, this is really helpful because it gives a lot of context, and it shows me that we've been moderately close to the 20% target, but we've never been there since 95, and I don't know what it looks like going back further, which kind of tells me that the magnitude of the effort to get there is going to be really significant, independent of what's happening externally with respect to factors that we can't control, the things that you cited. So 20%, point being 20% is a really aggressive target. I'm glad that we set it as a directional target rather than a by this date target, because 20% by 2020 was increasingly not reasonable.
Yeah, I don't think it ever was realistic, actually,
Yeah.
when you think about it. I think direction, I think the way that we've restructured this entire policy is so much more realistic, really, and helpful.
Well, can I make, to me, when I see a chart like this, I want to draw a straight trend line, and in this case, 2. And what this tells me is on the OPPD line, over the last 21 or 22 years, we've gone from being 10.5% below to 7.1. So the trend line goes in the wrong direction.
Correct.
For us. Meanwhile, the market prices are going from 5% or 5.2% or something below, or whatever it is, 15, $20 down or up to $30. I mean, it's the market. I don't know. I'm a little confused as to the right axis measurement, because that looks like it's getting more expensive.
Yes, One thing that you don't see here is our generation portfolio. So off-system prices tell you very little without the context of how much excess power we have, how much power we're putting into the market, and how the markets are evolving, our ability to interact and having bilateral trades only versus a more integrated market. Yeah. So it doesn't tell you the whole story. What it tells you, we had a significant construction of NC2, so we added significant amount of power into our portfolio halfway through that time period. So at the time where prices were higher, were reaching their peak, we added more power and we were selling more power. So I would say not necessarily the 1995 to 2005 time frame that wasn't necessarily as significant as the 2005 and beyond. We've added power and we've also subtracted power. We commissioned North Omaha 1, 2, and 3 to gas peaker stations. We decommissioned Fort Calhoun. That's not shown in here yet because it's 2016 data, but a few things have happened to our generation profile that have to be paired with the market prices. So it's how much power we have versus the price. But your point is well taken. I wouldn't necessarily draw that line from 1995 to today without the context of how much power and what's happened with the markets.
And the other item is the pressure of costs that we've reduced over the period of the last couple of years, where we have taken cost pressures off increasing rates that typically show up in benefits and payroll costs that go up each year. We've been able to reduce cost to not necessarily have those rate increases to substantiate those. Yeah. And the Center of Excellence and the work that Scott and the team are doing is to continually look at ways to reduce those costs and find those process improvements. And so we're taking that pressure away from that trend of increasing rates to flatten them over the next 3 more years, 19, 20, and 21. So.
Oh, here are a couple. Sorry, were you asking? When did we join SPP? When did that start?
Well, in different time frames. We joined SPP early in 2009, I believe, but it was in 2014 really that we started. We joined fully for market trading.
That's kind of what I'm asking.
So you only have 2 years here.
2012, I believe, is when we joined, and then 2014 is when they had the day-ahead market.
Okay.
Right.
All right. So that's helpful.
Thank you for the correction.
And then the EIA lag, that's really frustrating, but it is what it is. Does that limitation also affect the off-system prices, or are we waiting for EIA to tell us what off-system prices were in 17, or do we know what that?
We know what that
generally
is.
We know what that is. We have to know what that is on an hourly basis.
Right. That's kind of what I was included. So just where were we in 2017, give or take, if we were at
about the same, if not a little lower
than we were
in 16.
Okay.
Not significantly lower, but slightly lower.
So mid-20s?
Yeah.
Okay. And is that roughly where we're at today?
I would say.
Well,
today or broadly today?
Broadly.
Yeah.
So
prices are increasing now, right?
Yeah.
So we're seeing a trend over the last several months where we're seeing prices increase, but overall for the year, we believe we're going to be on average in that $25 range.
Okay. Without getting into sensitive information, in the general today.
This is the market piece.
Yep. Is that big enough?
Yes, thank you. That's what I needed.
Yeah, we already talked about the tax changes. So the private enterprises, they were forced to lower their rates by regulators. And so when you say that, how will that affect? Obviously, they're going to lower their rates. Makes it more competitive to reach that 20% goal, right? On what average did they lower the rates? Is there anything out there?
There isn't a standard average. It depends on the state. It depends on the utility. There's a big debate nationally about how long these is going to be sustained. Is this a one-year issue where starting next year you'll see rates come back up? Is this a political play? Is it a headline play? Only time will tell. We've also seen an increase in dividends also from private utilities. So the one thing that the Tax Reform Act did for us in this context, it made competition harder.
Yeah.
That is for sure. How long will it last? I don't know. But again, back to Director Moody's point earlier, what we can do and focusing on no general rate increase. we'll have to look back and do the lagging indicator to see how this is going to play out.
My experience on the investor-owned side is they defer as much tax as they can possibly defer, right? So it may not necessarily show up in rates in any given day. And so that's why some have executed some reductions. Some may have needed it anyway because of market prices being reduced and a number of different things that the public utility commissions are doing in some of the states. But we're seeing pretty marginal kinds of reductions, if any.
I'm not sure the regulators forced anybody to reduce. They encouraged them to, but I'm not sure they.
Yeah, they'll be the point where they're not going to see increases coming, which still puts the pressure on here, right? They're not going to go in for rate increases because they've seen that cost reduction. So it's kind of saying, listen, we were planning on going in, we're not going to go in, therefore we're going to reduce rates. We've seen that in a couple jurisdictions in the region. Some have forced them immediately, made a mandate and forced them. But around our region, it's been kind of hit and miss, depending on what that looks like.
And something important to note is that it's not just the corporate tax rate that changed. There are a lot of other underlying things that changed, like rules on amortization and depreciation of assets that have changed, and that may change the actions from private utilities, the way they invest in capital faster or slower, which could in turn show up in rates. So there are a number of underlying changes in the tax code that happened. That it's not just the corporate tax rate that changed, and so it'll be speculative at best for me to say how much this is going to change. But certainly it's raising the bar in terms of competition for us.
Okay, and then this isn't a question, but more of a comment. I do agree it's probably good we don't have a date specific on the 20%, but yet I think that was set as a reasonable or a challenging goal.
It's challenging.
To go out there and give you something to shoot for. Is it perfect? I don't know, but I think it's worked so far and we're doing a good job. You're all doing a good job as far as no general rate increase, and we'll see where we end up. But that was the conversation, remember, and I think it's still a good one. I don't
One
know,
comment
maybe,
and
maybe 20, isn't it? But
just to refresh the board's memory, when the board voted on the revisions to SE2, we showed some projections to say if the regional average rates continue to increase at the rate of inflation, so you can argue whether that's right or not, but we assumed if everybody else raises at the rate of inflation and we keep our rates steady, it is not unreasonable for us to believe that we will have that our rates are going to be around 20% below the regional average by the time we finish our 5-year regional rate increase, or will be in that neighborhood. Now, whether our neighbors' rates increase at the rate of inflation or not, that's yet to be seen. But it was an assumption we made to say yes, it's a big task for OPPD, but something that we may see here in the next few years by us holding our rates steady.
I think I have one more question on this. Sorry. Yeah. Going back historically, I vaguely recall that there was a long stretch where we didn't raise rates back in the 90s. Is that right?
Yeah, you can see.
It's when the market price, we didn't go back that far, but when they opened up access to the market where we could sell into the market, typically the exchanges that would occur on the generation side were cost plus. So cost plus 10%, let's say. Okay. And then the market price began to go. And then when gas prices got in the $50, $60 a million BTU or $4 to $5 a million BTU, $6 a million BTU, $11 a million BTU, that's when the revenue began to go, and there was no desire to, there's no need to increase rates.
You can see exactly
roughly how long
04,
did that,
05.
was that 10 plus years?
So, yeah, so.
13 years?
04, 05, if you look at that, if you look at the chart.
That's
you'll see where it's low. With that
Okay.
area,
The good old days.
04 to 08.
Okay. All right, I'm done now. Thank you.
Okay. So going into the principles, the first two, we're pairing the first two together to maintain fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory rates, as stated in Nebraska Revised Statute 70-655, and equitably assign costs across and within all customer classes. Evidence supporting that we've adhered to these principles is that all of our rate classes are based on customer usage characteristics, not on demographics, not on income, but on usage characteristics. They're applied on a fair, non-discriminatory basis, and the only differentiation is based on usage characteristics. And this is fairly common across the electric utility industry across the nation. There is an industry standard cost of service study that is performed annually to support the fact that we are, in fact, offering rates, and we have a cost of service that is in alignment with other utilities. Our rate design strives to align revenues with fixed variable rate cost structure. It is not perfect, but the rate restructure that the board voted on a few years ago certainly helps. It's aiming at having our revenues, the structure of our revenue that has a fixed and a variable component is closer aligned to our cost structure, fixed and variable. It's not identical by any means, but it is certainly better than what it used to be. Therefore, improving the equitability on who pays for what and aligning the revenue piece with the cost structure. And last but not least, the entire rate setting process is reviewed by the board's outside consultant, the Brattle Group. And you've had the Brattle Group's letters, and they've actually come here to the board in the past to talk to you about your rate design. And it's a nationally recognized rate design firm that provides that extra outside consulting perspective.
And the Brattle Group actually is coming to give us a, I don't know, a seminar on rate design next month. At the end of this month.
This month.
This month, actually. This month.
Yeah, the 24th and 25th.
24th and 25th, yeah.
How long have we had a relationship with the Brattle Group? Just curious.
So I would say probably in the last 3 or 4 years, probably. We went from CH2M Hill at one time, and then they began to get out of that piece of the business.
Okay.
And Brattle's been truly recognized as one of the leaders in kind of the rate consulting kind of area in all jurisdictions, all state jurisdictions, nationally on subjects and topics, whether it goes from FERC to retail rates to whatever it may be. So we did an RFP on that piece, and as we do periodically,
yeah.
And they were identified to be the best at that time.
The interview committee on that, along with the CFO and yourself.
No, but the finance chair was
Okay,
with
so
that.
that's
It is regularly looked at.
Revisit. All right, got it. Thank you.
Okay, next principle, a new principle, monitor affordability indicators. This is an interesting one because it's the first time we're monitoring these. But I was pleased to see. So there are 3 slides that I'm going to talk about here on monitoring affordability. Let me just start by saying that the concept of affordability is subjective. Affordability is always in the eye of the beholder. And so I am not trying to infer any decisive statement saying that our rates are affordable, other than showing some statistics that do provide evidence that our rates are more affordable than other rates in the nation, in neighboring states, and that we are on the affordable side when comparing to other states. There's always the case-by-case, neighborhood-by-neighborhood, household-by-household debate that I am not going to present today. We do not have that data, but that's the nature of the presentation here. Starting with this graph, it shows the percentage of the household income that is dedicated to the electricity bill. The percentage of the median household income for electricity in the highest 26 states where the electric bill is the highest. The percentage of the median household income spent on electricity is 2.74 of the household income. That's on the highest 26 states. The national average is 2.29%. The West North Central region, which is the region that the board asked us to look at, also is 2.2%. So we're already in a lower than the national average region. The bar is higher for us. We're more affordable than the national average. But that's not enough. We want to be even below that. And OPPD, when measured as a percentage of median household income for electricity, as of 2016, again, all of this data is 2016, our ratepayers on average pay 2.14% of their median household income is devoted to electricity. Now, that's not enough. There are other states, especially the lowest 25 states, that where that number is 1.88%. So it tells me there's room for improvement, certainly something that we're aiming with our no general rate increase and trying to keep our costs low to continue to drive lower, but certainly something that tells me that we are on the affordable piece on our way to becoming even more affordable. We're not on the other end of the spectrum.
And some of those lowest states, Washington State, as far as
Some of the
hydro?
lowest states, and it has to do, this is my opinion, some of those lower states are blessed with natural resources that provide naturally low-cost electricity, like hydropower in the state of Washington, Oregon, where I came from. Naturally, you have lower-cost power in some of those states. It's not an excuse. I'm not saying that we won't try to get there, but it's you have different topography, different natural resources, different fuel portfolios that contribute to a lot of these. There's a story behind all of these graphs you can interpret in different ways, but it's important for us to show that we are certainly on the lower end of the spectrum.
Hey, Javier, I have a quick question. Are there any countries that are outside of the Great Northwest that have very low electric prices?
Countries, you mean regions?
Regions or states in particular?
There are, and you're going to see that now.
Okay.
Perfect segue.
Okay.
The next graph, and I apologize for the tiny print. Hopefully you can see these. I did not label every dot. You're welcome. Otherwise it would be impossible to read. But what we did here, we plotted all 49 states. There is one state that's not in here, and that's the state of Hawaii, because if we had included that, the graph would have shrunk. Hawaii is an outlier, so we excluded the state of Hawaii for illustrative purposes. But what we did here, we plotted all 49 states against the U.S. median household income to average residential price per kilowatt hour. This is akin to a rate. Very, very important to show to say that we're measuring household income and not total income. Whoever pays for the electricity bill is the household, and so including household income here was important. That lowered the numbers, but it's something that's important for us to show the household income. The state of Nebraska, we don't have information for OPPD. Again, this is readily available information as of 2016, which is the latest available we have today. The state of Nebraska is right at slightly higher than the U.S. median on household income. So Nebraskans earn slightly more than the U.S. median. However, they do pay a lower residential energy price compared to the U.S. median. So this upper left-hand quadrant is the place to be when you're measuring affordability, right? And as Director McGuire pointed out, you have the state of Washington, for example, Utah, that are on the quadrant that says those residents have a higher median household income and they're paying a lower price for the electric bill. Therefore, you can argue that those states are residents in those states have a more affordable electric bill than states on the other quadrant where you have lower median household income and higher prices. Nebraska is certainly on that quadrant, and I would argue that states measured this way, states like Oregon, North Dakota, Utah, and Washington might be the ones that we're comparing ourselves to. OPPD, I would pose that our first job is to lower that rate or keep that rate stable so that we can continue to be more competitive on that horizontal line. There's not a lot we can do to increase jobs, although certainly with economic development and other initiatives, we're trying to increase jobs and increase the median household income. But our job here is to keep that rate as low as possible.
So this is Nebraska. Certainly, thank you for pointing out that we don't have OPPD specific data, but if generalizing, we know what our average residential price per kilowatt hour is, right? So we would know where, so generally speaking, how does that number vary from what we've got for Nebraska?
Even lower. So for OPPD, it would be, actually it would be about where the state of Nebraska is, just maybe slightly lower, depending on.
Say that again?
Slightly lower on average.
Yeah.
I'm talking just residential, commercial, industrial, there's a ton of different rates, but we would be at or slightly below that.
And our average income may be slightly higher. since
Yeah,
we're
that's
on
what I was
the
going to
eastern
assume
half-
as well.
Eastern side of the state.
Right. So but OPPD, just generalizing, based on Director Trinan's expertise, would be a little bit to the left of where Nebraska is and maybe a little bit higher.
Correct. And I've had conversations with Director Yoder, who's offered a few sources to say, can we look into these in a more granular way? We're going to continue to explore these in the future. There's a cost to getting all this data and the validity of the data when you're looking at just OPPD, but we're certainly going to continue to monitor.
I think for us, it's really it's a directional piece. If we were in the lower right-hand corner, that's a much different situation than being up in the upper left-hand corner.
Quadrant.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, lower right-hand quadrant versus the northwest. So so we feel pretty good that directionally, and with our directionally to be 20% below and no general rate increase for planned for the next 3 years. We're kind of living out this strategic directive very clearly. And again, I think part of our conversation with the board was, let us kind of take a look at kind of affordability and see, and I think we feel pretty good about where we are in the direction that we're moving.
The last thing I want to note on this graph is that the reason I named some of those states is that most of those states are also the ones on the West North Central region. Right, so again, reiterating the fact that we are in a very competitive region, and not only price-wise, but income-wise. We are surrounded by states that share similar income and similar price characteristics as us, so that makes our job a little harder to show, but we're up for the challenge. Now, the next graph, before I go into the next graph, let me explain what that does, and you can see the change. I'm still going to measure median household income, but I'm going to compare it not only to the price, but actually to the size of the electric bill. This has been a comment of a topic of discussion with the board to say it's not just the rate, it's the actual bill. Our customer owners may not care that much about the rate per kilowatt hour. They care about the actual bill, the amount of dollars they pay every month. Director Trinan mentioned a few board meetings ago that perhaps one explanation is we have such low rates that doesn't necessarily encourage people to save that much in energy consumption, and that may be supported by the next graph. So when I compare the average household income to the residential monthly bill, the state of Nebraska we're still at the same place when measured on the vertical axis, right? But our average residential monthly bill now fell, so now it's higher than more states than in the previous graph. This tells me a few things, maybe because of policy, because of consumer behavior. You have some states that naturally their residents consume less electricity. That potentially is explaining the reason why they have a lower electric bill. You can argue that the state of Nebraska, compared to more states than before, our average electric bill is higher than other states. If our prices are amongst the lowest in the nation, compared to, looking at the previous graph, but our bill is higher, the one variable there is consumption. And so our residents here are enjoying low prices, and therefore you could argue they're consuming more, as shown in here. We're still on that upper left-hand quadrant, but not as alone as we were in the previous graph. So we have more company from other states that are forced to or encouraged to consume less power.
So same question, do we know our average monthly residential bill?
Yes, and our average monthly residential bill is in the $101. Okay. So on this one I can tell you that OPPD would be lower than the state of Nebraska. Right now we have these in the $106.50.
Okay. And so we just hop on the other side.
Just
of
above
right
$100. That's our average residential bill. So we should be left and slightly higher than the state of Nebraska.
And that could be demographic, more people living in apartments here and a higher density population.
Sure. Absolutely.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Newer construction,
Newer
efficiencies, all the pieces that go with that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Better codes.
Hey, so the following 2 points, again, we're combining those two. Pursue rate process and structure changes to reflect the cost of energy when it's used, and offer flexibility and options. Really interesting here, of course, something that was recently voted by the board. The Rate Rider 500 demonstrates an option for customers to participate with more different renewable energy resources, and we're aligning that rate. The board approved a rate that aligns consumption of a specific technology with market prices and credit we're getting from that price. So we're providing that flexibility to add different products, and also the value that new technology may generate in the future, positive or negative compared to the rest of the rate payers. Again, pricing methodology provides foundation for future distributed energy resource rate options, whatever those may be, but it's a good foundation showing that flexibility and that forward thinking in rate making from the board. Another very, very important one was Rate 261M, which was key development in attracting new development and expansion. Facebook will be the first customer to use that rate. Clearly satisfied with the way they're working with OPPD and the rate, so much that they announced recently an expansion over what they announced last year. The OPPD has been, that 261M has been discussed in industry articles and forums as creative solution to meet corporate customer renewal objectives. Tim gets phone calls, I get phone calls from other executives in the nation asking about these rate and the rationale behind it. It's certainly innovative and maybe close to one of its kind in the nation. And it's consistent with the principles of equitably assigning the costs of service, but also of offering flexibility and options depending on what the customer needs are. The last one, again, and this is a subjective one, be simple and easy to understand. Well, if you're a rates professional, they are easy to understand. If you're an average ratepayer, they might not be that easy to understand. But we do believe that we take a look at our rates. We have a lot of people explaining rates to our customers. We aim for ease of understanding. All the rate schedules are available online for anyone coming into the region, whether they're residential, commercial, industrial. Increasing market-based rates allows these customer owners to understand and have confidence in market values. This speaks to rates 261M and rate 500. There is room, and let me just say out here that there's room for us to continue improving the understanding, the ease of understanding, the clarity of our rates. Julie Comstock just recently hired a new director of marketing. We're about to hire a new manager of pricing. We may engage in a project here in the next year on looking at our rates manual and seeing how can we make it more user-friendly, more easy to digest. I did not put that in here because we don't have that project on the queue yet, and I don't want to overpromise, but hopefully we can have that next year as a project to continue improving on that. It is a big project.
I'm happy to hear that, yeah.
I think that's great. I mean, the first bullet kind of makes me chuckle because just putting our rates online doesn't result in
making
easy to understand.
You'll be surprised because not all utilities have that. So,
which is shocking, but it's a low bar, right?
Point taken.
But in terms of
it's better than
demonstrating
others.
that they're simple and easy to understand, I'm having trouble correlating those two. So to hear you describe, the potential to really re-examine that is exciting. I think that's good.
I would say one of the items that's probably isn't up here is in the billing piece of that, right? So some of the JD Power. Yeah, why don't you talk a little bit about that on the billing piece? At least our
JD Power we score really high on the billing and payment.
Okay.
And part of that is understanding the bill.
Accuracy and understanding.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but what we did learn through our customer experience research, which looks at it a little bit differently, that there is questions, I guess, that customers and uncertainty that customers have about how the rates are applied.
Sure.
So we, as Javier mentioned, intend to embark on that endeavor, but we haven't scheduled the resources yet to try and get some clarity around that for our customers, whether it's through information we provide on the bill online or by rewording our rates manual so it is more easily understood.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So that concludes the presentation. Really, the conclusion here is after going through all of these, the recommendation from staff to the PI committee, and I believe the PI committee is now recommending this to the board for consideration on Thursday, is to accept this monitoring report for SZ2 and recommends that the board find OPPD to be sufficiently in compliance with board policy SZ2. That will be a board item on Thursday.
So the action item will be that we will vote whether or not we are in compliance with SD2 as it is written right now.
And that's on consent, right?
Yes, that's on consent. And then the next question is whether or not anyone feels that there should be any improvements in this, and if so, that would go back, we can discuss that in the committee, and whether or not there should be any improvements in this policy. I think we've made some great strides this year for this policy. I would think.
If there are no other questions or comments,
questions?
that concludes my.
Yeah, I would echo that. I mean, it's easy to always look at these, and I tend to be detailed, so I like to tinker around the edges a little bit. But in terms of the affordability stuff, is great, super great, and it's really. I wouldn't hesitate in the future to present, even if it's just ballparking where OPPD is on those graphs, so that we can get a sense for how we compare to the state.
Let's be accurate.
But I think it's a really good step forward for us to think about affordability in different ways, acknowledging that ambiguity is really kind of core to the definition of affordability. My inclination is to, we just changed it last time we revisited. I'm inclined to roll with it for a year at least and continue to monitor these affordability trends, and we'll see how it looks next year.
Okay.
So far, that's the consensus. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Javier.
Okay, next on the docket, we have system management, and I want to mention that some of the board members attended Mr. Dogman's award ceremony, that he was the UNO Business Leader, one of the awardees, and that was a very nice luncheon. We enjoyed it. Thank you. Great speech, bringing back your roots. I really enjoyed the speech on the relationship of the effect of your family and your father on your, amazing success.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it got a little bit emotional for me, but
Yeah.
it was such a great honor to be recognized, and especially from UNO. So that was awesome, and thank you for attending. Thank you for your support.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, quite a few of us did. Okay, next we have Mr. Trinan, if you'd like to tip off systems.
We did meet last week. Director Yoder chairs this committee, and he's at an out-of-town commitment, so I'm going to turn this over to Mo. Mo or Mary? I don't know which turn goes first.
Actually, Julie. Yeah, I think Julie has
okay.
over 500 first.
All right.
Perfect.
So I have a reporting item for a contract that we awarded to Enlighten, and they are performing our 2018-2019 pole attachment and street light inventory. And so the amount of that contract is $729,810. And 73% of that, or about $532,000 of it, is reimbursed to OPPD by the telecommunications companies and others who have pole attachments. So the purpose of the inventory is, as you know, OPPD has our poles in the right-of-way, in the public right-of-way, and so we allow other companies to attach to those poles, and then they pay us a fee for doing that. We intermittently do this inventory. The last one we did was 5 years, just to make sure that we have accurate records and are billing and recouping the expenses of having those attachments on our poles out in the field, and so that it comes back through to our ratepayers. So the other portion of it is for the streetlight inventory, and so that will help us as we're doing the LED. Again, we do this usually every time we do a pole attachment. We're also doing streetlights just to ensure that our records are accurate for billing our customers. But this time it certainly will help us with our streetlight inventory, ensuring that we get them all switched over to the LED eventually over the next 5-year period.
Reminder, how many streetlights do we have in the district?
There are about 100,000.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and this is an inventory that is throughout the entire service territory.
So So Julie, have we ever considered doing this on kind of a cycle counting basis? The way you would do an inventory, have somebody that just continually is out doing different regions of the city?
I don't know that we have. I think we have done it this way because part of our pole attachment contracts with the telecommunications companies are written such that we do it periodically and true things up. But it is something that we could look at, potentially doing it on a cycle basis.
Okay.
Typically, we don't see significant adjustments when we do those.
Okay.
With our relationship with the pole attachment companies and for streetlights, for SIDs, typically we're actively involved in those, so we know that. But for the pole attachments, it's really to make sure, again, for us, we have great relationships, so we get that information from the telecom companies or those others that are putting attachments on.
How much is an attachment?
It is about $11 a year that we bill them for each attachment.
Kind of industry standard, or it's just something?
That is
I think it's within the
based off of
FCC.
our cost of
Yeah.
service, but it's within the FCC range of what you can charge.
Okay.
So that was one of the items that you heard about with the legislation.
The
that
legislation
being
was trying to
pursued.
switch that around.
Does every pole get an attachment, or is it just along major street or right away, or?
It is all dependent on the telecommunications
Okay.
company and where they're wanting to run their cables.
All right. Is it a cable, or is it like a Wi-Fi box or something?
It could be any of
It
those
can be,
things.
okay.
Correct. So yeah, and now I think with more people having devices that they want to attach, that's why the inventory is becoming more and more important, because some folks will attach things to our poles without notifying OPPD, and there is an engineering assessment that needs to be done to ensure that the poles can withstand that.
Which is why the idea every 5 years might not be enough anymore, because the question is to do it every
Right,
5 years.
right.
As far as safety.
It's like a year-end inventory versus a continual cycle
Right,
count.
yeah.
You can avoid that one-time big expense by just doing it ongoing.
Yeah.
And just make sure that you cover it every couple, 2-3 years, you're getting coverage. So it's just a different approach.
Julie, I have a quick question. Is there any update on changing the bulbs over to the LED?
We're still moving down the path of doing it over a 5-year period.
Okay.
So the team has, they're working on the RFPs, and then based on the pricing that comes back in that, we, as in Javier's team, will recalculate what the rates would be for LED streetlights, and that's when we would move forward. My team, Steve and Todd McLaughlin, who is here and presented it, are going out and meeting with the different villages and cities and sharing what we anticipate that will look like based on the estimates that we have so far and what our plan is.
When's the timeline? Because we're all getting contacted by people. When's the timeline to do this? That we'll know as directors.
We will be beginning the installations late this year, but for sure by first quarter in January we'll be doing the LED.
But you said you're out looking at RFPs now. Who's going to do it?
No, just the cost.
No, just the cost. We're doing it
vendor.
through our own resources and contractors that we already have is what our current plan is. So the RFP is really just on the equipment, the device itself, the street light.
And that'll be the basis that will go into the LED rate that will be
Correct.
calculated.
Correct.
Which comes to the board, right?
Right.
The rate.
LED rates.
So that we anticipate would be like late summer, that
Okay.
we would have what that would be calculated out to present to the board.
So will the systems management committee be engaged in this, or
Well,
how much
it would be
is
public information.
There's public information rates.
It's a rate.
And I guess the contract, it would be reported through systems management on the actual device purchases or bid.
It's probably one of those, we'll give an update to the board periodically on our status and how many we've exchanged and that process. We haven't got there yet, so
Right.
I think Julie and the team is, once we're doing the pricing, we'll get that in play, and then we'll begin to put together kind of what that program looks like. Those lights that are kind of that are out that we'll begin to replace with LEDs, and then those that are nearing their end of life.
Right.
We'll begin to work through what that project plan looks like.
When Steve and Todd are out meeting with the cities and counties now, they're really just sharing the information that you heard at the board meeting
Yeah,
and a
last
general
time.
idea of what the savings would be, that'll be over a 5-year period. Everybody wants theirs done first.
Yeah,
So-
sure. Oh, yeah.
So they're working through
Yeah.
those conversations.
Have we selected a vendor?
No.
That's when the RFP will come to
Yeah.
the systems.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Okay, next, systems.
Thank you.
Next.
I have the next item.
Oh, go. Please.
Thank you, Director Twyman. So we have a board action item to award a contract for the purchase of 2 high-voltage auto transformers. And those auto transformers would transform the voltage from 161 kV to 345 kV and vice versa, depending on what the system is doing and what how the power is flowing. This is a really good thing that we're doing, because one of those transformers will be replacing an existing transformer that about 42 years old, I believe. And what we do, we have what we call dissolved gas analysis, where we monitor what's going on with the transformer. And this one appeared to be getting close to the end of life. So we're being very proactive in going and purchasing that transformer. The other one that we're getting will be a spare to ensure the resiliency of our system, because we do have some auto transformers on the system. And in fact, by the time we get this next spare, by May of 2019, we will have 2 spares. So I think OPPD is really sitting in a very good position from the resiliency perspective. So we had 5 proposals, and the bid from Hyundai Power Transformers USA was evaluated to be the lowest and best bid. So we'll be asking the board to award the contract to Hyundai Power Transformers in the amount of $5,913,726, which is under the engineer's estimate. The engineer's estimate was $6.1 million for 2 transformers, and this bid is below the engineer's estimate, which is really good. I think they really nailed it. Any questions?
The auto transformer stuff always sort of amazes me, because this is really the reliability of the entire system when you look at it. How many of these 345 161s do we have?
We have about 7 of them, which is why it'll be great once we have 2 spares.
Yeah, because we have 1 spare now.
Right, we have 1 spare now.
And we have other auto transformers that are less voltage, correct?
Absolutely,
Yes,
we
we have
have
a lot more
other auto transformers
All
between the
different levels.
161 to 69. Yeah, but
This
to
is
your
the biggie.
point, that's right. To your point, these are very important, not only to OPPD, to the region, because obviously we're connected to other utilities on the system, and so it's really important to make sure that we have good transformers, and we have a plan to replace them in case we have problems in the future, because the lead time is about a year to make these transformers. They're very specialized, and they take a lot of time to make. And once we get those, we'll have to assemble them, we'll have to fill them with oil, test them, go through the whole process to get them operational. So again, OPPD is being really proactive, and I think we got a good plan here. I also should mention that the senior team with Tim's leadership approved a multi-year plan to replace a few more in the next few years. So we're really sitting very well in the next 5 years.
Different size transformers?
Similar,
these
similar,
ones.
yeah, auto
These
transformers that
That's
are
good.
similar in age, and again, we have a lot of monitoring, some of them online monitoring equipment to ensure that the health of the transformer is good. So some of them, we're going to be proactively replacing those in the next few years. So we'll come back to you to request additional purchases of auto transformers.
And these are massive. They weigh tons.
They are massive. In fact, we
I'm moving one right now. We
had
need an
one
update on that.
on 180th and just outside of our center. I think they moved it yesterday, I believe.
No.
It's this evening.
Okay, this evening. So yeah, if you have a chance to go to 180th and Dodge, right outside our center, it's huge. I was there and I stood next to the tire of these equipment that move it, and you're looking way up. It's they are massive.
Our team's covering it as well, so.
So yeah, you'll see a
it's
story. Thank
massive.
you, Lisa.
You can look on the wire, right? Aren't they covering it on the wire?
Mo, I've got to ask a very basic question.
Sure.
We only have 7 of these transformers. Why do we need 2 backups rather than 1?
Oh, yeah.
And in the event that we have one and we have to use it in a catastrophe, are there others readily available within the region that can be brought in a day or two to fit in?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I say we'll have to, it's really what we're doing. We're kind of getting a spare and then using it to replace an older one that we need to replace while we're getting one. So this plan will be kind of doing this for about 4 or 5 years. By the time we're done, we'll have 2 spares. The other point, those are really specialized. That's really hard to share. We looked at that a couple times with our neighbors. Even we looked at a broader range whether we can share transformers, and it's very difficult to do. A third, they're incredibly difficult to move, and it takes a long time to get all the permits. You're closing, interstates and streets. It's just very complicated, and really for the cost, we've determined it's very wise for OPPD to have 2 spares. Plus, we continue to increase our system to install more. Like right now, we're adding one at a substation. I'm not going to mention the location. But so we continue to build up our system, and it'll be really good to have 2 that we can use.
Director Mines, I think that was part of the decision-making process that the team brought to us, was the acquiring these transformers. The other one was kind of an insurance policy around it. But really the cost of that insurance policy was really around more terroristic related activity, not necessarily about wear and tear or other system damages that may occur. And so the team, as we evaluated, and the whole senior team and Mo's team engaged around it very clearly, thought this was really the best direction for us to go, one, to maintain our reliability or resiliency, because we do have some aging transformers. We just want to make sure we have positioned correctly and in place so that we can utilize them. We may look longer term about some other insurance policies in the future with the regional utilities, national utilities for that matter, on similar voltages. But in the immediate future, we wanted to make sure we began to have our backup.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd like to take just a minute, introduce a couple of the team members that really did all the work and did all the analysis, and they're doing a fantastic job. We have Tim Nissen, who's the director of T&D engineering. That's been with us for a long time, a very great job with this. And then we have Matt Ibas, a manager of substation design, and they both have done a great job putting the plan and putting a solid business case that the senior team felt this is a really good thing to do for OPPD and approved it. So.
Right. Thank you.
If I may add, this is just from a supply chain perspective, the other very important piece here is the lead time.
Yeah.
From a supply chain and inventory management perspective, you want to make sure that you have an efficient inventory management. However, you do have to take into account lead time for a very specialized equipment like this one, where it takes multi-years, sometimes 18 months or so, to sometimes to get some of this equipment. We may not be able to afford a just-in-time strategy, so more spares on certain equipment like this one is justified versus regular equipment that can be purchased off the market.
Thank you.
Especially for load increases.
Yeah.
I assume that we'll store our spares separately, not together?
Yes, and that's something we're not prepared to share now, but absolutely there's a lot of analysis on where and how, and actually even plans that what if, how do we proceed? So there's a lot of thinking, and again, I give a lot of credit to the team behind me. One more thing I want to add, and then I'll leave it alone, that those are so critical that if you lose one, it does impact generation. They will have to run some peaking units, and so
Yeah.
there is quite a bit of cost,
It's huge reliability.
which really support the business case to buy these expensive equipment.
Good answers.
All right.
Hey, Director Mines, I think this is an interesting point too, beyond what Mohammed said, is it's interesting that the voltages levels between us and other utilities vary as well. So they're not just interchangeable. For example, we're the only one in the state of Nebraska that has 345 and 161. So
Yeah, that's a
I
separate.
didn't know that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and PPD uses 230
So-
instead of
So
161.
we don't all use the same exact transformers, and so it's a little more difficult just to find neighbors that you can swap with.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Nissen can give you an entire lecture on the different types of transformers and the
He
different
sh-
types of uses.
he sure
It's
can.
really complex.
They sure
I
can.
remember I've had a couple of, and we used to refabricate some of those older ones too. I don't know if we're in the plans for doing any refabrication for the older ones, but,
Yeah, I think
less ones.
we always evaluate what's the
Evaluate
best
that
option
too.
for
This one
OPPD
needed
and
the new
proceed
ones.
with that, so, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
I believe I have the next item, which is replacement of the catalyst in our catalytic reduction system for Nebraska City 2. We have 2 trains. We're replacing the middle layer of our catalyst. Part of the upkeep of that system is to replace it every 2 years. We've gone to a catalyst module that we are installing that can be pulled out and regenerated a number of times. And so replacement of this is really going to help us in the future in terms of our maintenance costs associated with that system. We had 3 bids that we received. One was legally not responsive in that the vendor requested that we change the terms of the bids, the terms that we had put out. As we go through a sealed bid process, that's not allowed in that process. So we had to determine that to be legally non-responsive. And then one was technically non-compliant in that because we want these modules to be able to be pulled out and regenerated, we had specific parameters that we wanted them to meet, and that was not compliant with that. As a recommendation to the board, we'd like to award the contract to, I have to think about, Iridium Ceram for $1,641,460 to replace that middle layer of the catalyst modules.
And for people who are listening on, this has to do with our NOx reductions and ammonia reductions, correct?
It is the NOx reductions component of the operations at Nebraska City 2.
Right.
I have a question for Javier on this. Since this is a shared ownership facility, do we bill, oh, it's not, okay. It's just contracted. All right. Then I don't have a question if it's not shared ownership.
Participation.
Okay, all right.
Very important differentiation.
Huge differentiation.
I think that concludes our.
My bad.
Okay, and this is also on the consent agenda, correct?
Correct.
Yes, all of these will be. Okay. Is that the end of systems? If there's no more, we can go to governance. That would be Mr. Gay, rather.
All right, we have several things. Governance Committee met last Friday.
Can we take a bio break?
Yeah,
You want to take a break?
Sure.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Why don't we take a 15-minute break?
Yeah, just 10 minutes.
10 minutes? Okay.
Thank you.
Come back.
Great
10:30?
idea.
Bless your health, please, too.
No, I was in a panic this morning.
10:30. Take it. Yes, I am. If you'd like to start, that'd be great.
All right, the governance subcommittee met Friday, and there's several items on the agenda, as you can see. We got severance agreement. We discussed strategic directive 1, and then we looked at some monitoring reports for government policies 1 through 4 and 1 through 5. So we're going to go into closed session as well and talk about corporate officer comp and a few other things. But let's just start with the severance agreements right there. And is Mark, where's Mark? Who's gonna?
Mark's not here today, but Kate will be able to pick that up.
Do you want to do it, Kate, or do you want me to? Go ahead. Have at
So
it.
in terms of this, so these are the severance agreements related to the BT work that was done in terms of our transformation of our area. So, I don't know what questions anyone might have, but
those were all approved and discussed in the committee, and we recommended approving all those.
And this was an existing policy too. There was no.
There's nothing outside.
This is our
this
existing
is
redeployment policy.
Yep. So, and if there are already questions on those, Mark can fill you in, but that are pretty. So we'll do that. Then we'll jump to SD1. Scott, you want to help out with this one on where we're at on SD1? I think we're ready to approve this, but.
Yeah, great. Actually, the point today is to approve some revisions made to SD1 that the governance committee met and wanted to recommend. Just as a reminder of where we are in the process, the board reviewed strategic foundation during the February 13, 2018 committee meeting and passed the resolution 6236 on February 15th. That found OPPD to be sufficiently in compliance with the policy. The governance committee gathered initial feedback during the February 13th meeting. Kim Tracy had requested any additional feedback via email, and we also reviewed outstanding feedback from board comments from the July 24th workshop. The governance committee met with members of the senior management team and looked at all of the feedback that the board had provided over time and came up with some recommendations. The way the policy reads right now is this, and what the specific recommendations were was first really to add OPPD's core values, and the committee was recommending to change as suggested. It was a clear part of the strategic foundation. It's treated as such, and so the revised policy will indicate that that would be added. Second is to leverage OPPD's leadership to achieve these goals, changing the word goals to principles, and also the governance committee felt that that made sense. There were a couple of other comments made throughout. Declare either environmentally sensitive or responsible to define it, to clarify meaning. At this point, the governance committee did not have any recommended changes simply because SD7 is in discussion right now, and where SD7 lands is also going to be answering the question of what is sensitive or reliable or responsible or whatever the terminology is. So the notion was on SD1 to continue moving forward and make a change as appropriate contingent upon any changes to SD7. There was a request to define energy service, and the committee had said no recommended changes. The notion here is that there are so many changes. To try to be so specific right now could also change again to tomorrow and the next day. So to leave it broad, the governance committee had recommended to leave it broad. Expand vision to include all advantages of public power. Again, there's no recommended changes to the policy at this time. There are numerous advantages, and advantages can change over time. So to be able to speak to the longevity of the policy and to be more general at this time. And it would be a challenge to be all-inclusive. And finally, there's a recommendation to support, exemplify fiscal, social, and environmental responsibility to optimize value to our customer owners with dashboard measures for each. And the committee had no recommended changes at this time. Metrics are actually showing up in other policies where appropriate, and this is kind of a policy that's a little bit more general and less specific in terms of its overall measures. So this was, I think, a summary of the committee discussion, and I would ask Director McGuire, Director Gay, and
I agree.
if there was
This is an
anything I've missed
overall,
in the summary.
it's a vision that can't get too,
Right.
we don't want it too specific, because that's what the other
Yeah.
strategic directives are for.
If you can go to the next page, the
Yeah.
actual
So-
policy revisions, you
Yeah,
can look
thanks.
at that.
And I don't think it's necessary to enumerate the advantages
No.
of public power in the vision. I think that's overkill.
Right, this is our strategic foundation, it should be
number one.
concise,
Right. The big vision.
and, you know, the other policies will expand upon that, is what the thought was.
So the committee was recommending rewording the policy as it's stated here, changing again the word goals to principles and listing out the core values. Any discussion or questions?
Couple comments. Thank you for this work. And I know this, I mean, this is Strategic Directive 1, and in many ways it probably should be one of the more important ones, so it's good to sort of think through it and make sure we're
It's the foundation.
square on it. Yep.
Yeah.
I understand the sentiment around not enumerating all of the different advantages of public power, but we did make at some point a decision to specify affordable and reliable. I'm not saying that those are wrong. I'm just saying that it is possible to discern between all of those at some point. Make that comment, move on. I'm fine with it. Next question is about, we had talked about a glossary for these things at some point?
It's there.
And is energy services defined in the glossary? Okay. So this is the one that I continue to struggle with a little bit, because when I think about energy services, there are a lot of things that fall under that umbrella, and then if I'm following our mission, I ask myself the question, is this particular energy service affordable? Is it reliable? Is it environmentally sensitive? So again, I don't think we need to outline what energy services is in the policy. I think it's worth consideration to maybe even not specifically give a list of what our energy services are, but to offer some clarity around that in the glossary, to me would be helpful. Because it's really easy to just default to, well, we're talking about selling kilowatt hours. And it's much more than that.
And it will continue to change.
And it's continuing to change and evolve, so I just think that there would be an advantage to adding a definition, even if it's not in the policy, but if it's in the glossary at some point.
I think we'll go ahead and do that. I think it's appropriate, and again, the definition will be broad.
Yeah.
Because I would have told you 6 months ago in that definition, it probably isn't about doing an RFP for a solar array for an end-use customer.
Yeah.
Today it is.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the dynamic nature of kind of what we're doing and really being responsive to customers. So let us do a draft of that and put it in the glossary.
Other energy services might be providing batteries to customers in the future. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, so it's like so broad.
And then the only last thing that I would say is put a colon after core values, treat it the same as we do with mission and vision. And then I'm good.
You are so nerdy.
I love it. You're just like my mother.
Things matter.
This is the
We
Iowa
run a
education.
$1.2 billion
Great
company.
Iowa education. Let me tell you.
Details are important.
His dad, as a math teacher, was very similar to this, by the way. I would take full responsibility for that. And it's probably because of a student like me that he ended up that way.
I appreciate it.
So to confirm actions, we will add a colon and we will.
I'd like to talk about that colon. No, I've got questions about that colon.
Should it be a semicolon?
So I say it's a semicolon, that's all there is to it.
So after
I
we add
appreciate
that,
your input, Director.
we're good. Then do we need any, so through the process, we've had input, we've had discussion. This is not an action item other than adding the colon, right?
Right, and then what will happen is we'll go out. What
That sounds
happens,
bad.
it will go out to.
You can not add it, we'll add it next year.
Okay.
I'll hassle you about it.
You'll break catch it next year. That'd be a challenge.
The standard process in all of these is for this to go out then for
30
public
days.
comment of
Okay,
30-day posting.
that's
We will
what
bring it back, or review any feedback during committee, and then, depending on the feedback, move it forward for approval on Thursday board meeting, or go back to committee if the feedback would warrant that consideration. So.
Okay.
In June.
Yeah.
You know, it was interesting that
June won't
It'll
be
be
30
in
days,
June.
it'll just be the next
June
board meeting.
regular
Sorry,
agenda.
it would be June, that's a good point.
And it'll
so
be
it won't
out for
30
public
days.
Yeah, it won't be 30 days, but
Okay,
it'll be to
thank
the
you.
next board meeting.
You know,
Yep.
and we did have a discussion about whether or not this should actually be a policy or not, because it is really the foundation and is so broad that if we treat it as a policy, we'd have to go through all of the policies to see whether or not it was acceptable or not. So that was sort of the little crux of it, as I remember.
Yeah, but I think
But I
since
mean,
it
it is a policy, but I
thing,
mean,
it should
we
be
can't, as far
publicly-
as monitoring it, what actually should monitor it is all the policies, the other policies that we have
Yeah.
should be monitored.
Yeah. I think that's right.
Yeah.
I will say, in pulling together the monitoring report on an annual basis, it is a challenging one because
It's
it
almost
does feel
impossible.
like you're going back and summarizing all of the other monitoring reports, so.
Yeah, whether or not this should be actually monitored or not. Or maybe we should just look at our statement and see whether or not we want to change the strategic foundation or not.
Yeah, that might, yeah.
Rather
that
than
makes
have
sense.
accept a monitoring report, because the monitoring report is all the other policies that we review throughout the year
To reinforce this.
to reinforce this.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'll leave that to.
I think we
people who
could
do this all-
easily come back with a recommendation to change the monitoring method and come back with something tangible so you can see how it would at least be reviewed, to your point, Director McGuire, and make sure is this still in alignment with what we think the mission and the vision and the values
Right.
are.
And would the monitoring report actually for this be the schedule for the policies of when we're going to be monitoring them?
It could, and I think in addition,
that
it
could
would be
be one of
important to
them.
have the feedback from the board. Does the vision and the mission and the values
Right, to
still?
look at that still.
Yes, yeah. So we could show both of those.
What about just doing it every 2 years, or would that be too much of a
Well, I think
pain?
we should look at it every year. It's the foundation. You know, just look at it.
All right.
Or in some cases, it might be, one of the policies indicates that we would do an in-depth review on policies every 3 years. So given the nature of a vision and a mission and values, it might be.
Maybe do that every
Yeah.
3 years?
So if you let us, we can come back with a recommendation in terms of timing and monitoring method that
I think
would
that
make
makes sense.
sense and
Yeah,
bring that back for.
because this is definitely a different one as far as
Yeah.
monitoring.
You're right, the monitoring report is a beast. I mean, you're pulling everything together, yeah.
It's, and it's redundant.
Yeah.
Actually.
It's redundant of all the other policies.
Good. Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
No? Okay, thanks, Scott. So next steps will be next public comment, and then we'll vote on this probably in the June general meeting. So the other one was monitoring reports. We looked at monitoring reports, GP 1 through 4, BL 1 through 5, and I'm going to turn that over to Scott as well. Walk us through.
Thank you. As part of its commitment to governance, the board also commits to taking a look at the board's staff linkage policies and the governance process policies. We'll start with the governance process policies, and these are the ones where the board has indicated how it's choosing and would like to govern itself. There are 14 governance process policies, 15. 15. That should read 15. In support of its commitment, the policy to governance, the board did respond to a survey in March of April of 2018, and really asking two questions. Is the board in compliance with this policy as written? And what, if anything, would you like the board to consider to enhance its overall effectiveness as a board in relation to policy? What we did this time is we broke them up. In the past, we've done all BLs and all GPs at the same time, and it did not really allow for quality discussion. So we felt that in breaking them up kind of on a quarterly basis, it would allow for regular, ongoing, and quality discussion around these policies as well. So 7 directors responded to the survey, assessing the compliance, and based on the entirety of their responses, the board found OPPD to be sufficiently in compliance with the board policies of GP 1 through 4.
Hey, Scott, too. I want to thank everyone for 7 responded, but also thanks Kim and yourself for, that was quite a questionnaire. A lot of work goes into that. And thank you all for responding. It's important. So, sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Individually, one director had responded that the board is not in compliance with GP2 governance focus. The survey results look like this. Again, there were 4 policies reviewed. Purpose of the board, governance focus, board job description, and agenda planning. The details of all these policies are available for anyone at any time at OPPD.com. And again, kind of the responses showed themselves up this way. There were multiple comments. What we wanted to do, and the governance committee asked us to do really, was to provide a bit of a summary of those comments. So the first one is really the board commitment and collaboration to effective governance and support of OPPD customers is strong. There were several comments about the OPPD board's commitment to this governance and governing in this way. And the second point was timely quality information sharing is critical to board effectiveness. There were a few comments around like providing information on events in board member districts would be important, and I know that Ms. Olson is aware of that, and I think it's part of the director's updates. Link reference documents to policy references wherever applicable, and I think that is happening, or has happened. It's out there. Provide IRP data annually, and communicate rationale for key decisions. So these are all things that we hear, we listen to, and we're responsive to. Are there any comments or discussion around this? I think this is intended to simplify a review of these unless there's detailed discussion for any of these policies.
I guess the governance focus, can we read what the governance focus was? What is
Yes.
the governance GP2? Let's read that.
So the governance focus reads, the board shall govern with an emphasis on strategic, forward-looking vision and leadership versus administrative detail. Clear distinctions between the board and president and chief executive officer roles, and collaborative decision-making that encourages diverse viewpoints. The board shall cultivate a sense of group responsibility. The board shall be responsible for excellence in governing. The board shall use the experience, input, and expertise of its individual members to enhance the board as a body. The board shall set policies. The board shall direct, evaluate, and inspire the organization through the establishment of written policies reflecting the board's standards. The board's major policy focus will be on OPPD's intended impacts outside the organization, not on the functions or methods used to achieve results. The board shall be responsible for continual board development. Development will include orientation of new board members, periodic external and internal training of existing board members, and regular board discussion regarding process improvement. And finally, the board shall regularly discuss and evaluate its performance. Self-monitoring will include, but is not limited to, annual board surveys, annual reports from each committee chair, and regular monitoring of adherence to policies adopted by the board. In the survey, there's really not a clear delineation in terms of why one member had felt that specific way. So I don't know if there's any comments from board members sitting around on this survey or consideration of this policy.
What was the second or third one as far as a relationship with?
The board shall cultivate a sense of group responsibility.
The group
The board shall be responsible for excellence in governing. The board shall use the experience, input, and expertise of its individual members to enhance the board as a body.
Okay.
So, I don't know that it makes any sense for us to sit here and try and guess at what that individual was thinking.
Yeah.
I agree.
I'm wondering, are these responses anonymous?
Yes.
Yes.
Entirely?
Yep.
Yes.
So I guess my question then would be, what's the purpose for doing that? Because I would be interested in knowing and wanting to know and understand who felt we were not in compliance, why. There might be some issues that we, it's only one of 7, so it's not a huge deal, but if there's something that, I don't know, whoever the governance chair is would touch base, I could envision a scenario where, hey, you said no, can we talk about it? I'd like to know what you're thinking, what the concern is, and if it's something important, we bring it back, and if it's not, then we address it and move on. Just a thought, because as we go to the next ones, the BLs, there were 2, and again, not...
Right. And that one, it's more clear what the issues are.
Good.
Or challenges.
Okay. So anyway, that's just a suggestion for maybe how we do this
My
in the
only
future.
thought is that the governance focus, the one person who said that might be thinking the same thing related to the BLs.
Yeah, that was my perception as well.
That's my perception.
But we don't know.
Yeah.
It was a different response though, right? Because in the BLs it was 1 in 7. And I assume one is the same person.
We don't know.
Anyway,
Yeah,
it's
that's
a
something
process
to-
question.
Yeah, something to consider.
Yeah.
For sure. I think if we had, you know, I don't know what the 8th would have been had they figured it out. But if it's 1, but I think the general rule of thumb is, well, 1 out of 8 is not a big problem.
Agreed.
Obviously. The other one
Agreed.
didn't bother to fill it out, so it
Right.
must be, I'm gonna say it's good, I'm gonna be positive.
And if somebody has a really big issue, then it's really beholden upon them to bring it up for discussion, not for us to pursue it.
Yeah.
If they've got an issue, they should step up and say, I got an issue.
Well, I fully agree, and that was a comment that I was going to make in the next one. This is, in my view, sort of a passive-aggressive way to express concern. If you've got an issue, like,
Well,
let's
and
talk
I think,
about it.
yeah, and that's a good point. But I think
think so.
part of the governance committee, as you're gonna see on the next slide, is recommend to approve this. But part of that, you know, if there's a trend and it was 3 out of, you know, 4, my gosh, then we probably, what's going on? But 1, I don't think it's something to worry about.
It's not. I don't have a concern about it.
Yeah.
It was just inquiring about the process.
Yeah, and the
Take it or leave it.
anonymous, I think, why we do that is just for that, so you can kind of feel you're not gonna be, oh gosh, I wanna give a critique, but I don't wanna be all over it. I think on the anonymous one, Scott does a good job of compiling those for the committee to look at, and you get a sense of, oh gosh, do we have a problem? So.
Yeah, and I wouldn't suggest, and again, take it or leave it, but I wouldn't suggest turning this into a fully transparent so that I know exactly what Director Trinan said, but I think there might be an opportunity for you to know and to be able to share strategically in a way. I don't know. It's a random idea. I just don't want to lose an opportunity to get some quality feedback if there is something there. But I agree that there might be an opportunity for people to just, if there's a legitimate concern, step up and say.
Yeah, I have no problem being completely transparent about it. I don't have anything to
I think it might get
disguise or hide or
extremely
anything.
political if it is transparent. I don't think that's a good idea.
Okay.
Well, I think those are good comments. I think it's something that we should discuss.
We should discuss for later.
And maybe at the next meeting, let's bring it up, and
Yeah.
is that something
We can
to
discuss it
pursue?
more.
Give it a little thought.
Yeah.
Again,
and
this
go
is the
from
first
there.
time we're monitoring this way. We've been struggling trying to figure out how to self-monitor ourselves.
Yeah.
And, you know, this is probably telling us we don't have the right tool yet.
But
I think
But
one of the
earlier,
things I would
though,
just
as
add
I
is
said, I think
close
that survey,
Maybe.
the survey to the members is very good and in depth, and there's opportunities to add those things. I guess the only question is saying, should it be, you know, should we know who's doing it?
Something to think about. It might be
You know,
fine,
frankly,
too.
if the 1 or 2 or 3 have an issue, they can put it under the summary of comments.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't see a comment here necessarily that would lead to a no. So I think from a not being transparent, or being transparent, you might hinder people from saying what they want to really say.
Right.
Yeah.
Those of us that are
And there
very
again,
shy.
it's just one, it's just one, so.
Okay.
I know.
There's a
I would suggest-
recommendation to move on.
I would suggest, I think the inference has to do with the BL, so I suggest we go to the BLs.
Yep.
Yep, let's do that.
So the recommendation?
Yeah, the recommendation on this is going to be, just because there's one, let's,
2 people to 4 accept.
to approve it. So, and that will be on the consent agenda. Any other concerns, you know?
If I could summarize one point, I think
You bet.
that this report does highlight that the board is generally in agreement that full compliance on these policies, which I think is good. And it does, I think, to your point, Director McGuire, tee up the next board staff linkage. So in this case, the process was quite similar. Although in this case, we asked, is the board OPPD in compliance? Because while GPs are really how the board is choosing to govern itself and the practices that it adopts, this involves other people than the board, as you will see. So the questions changed slightly. And again, the board as a whole found OPPD to be sufficiently in compliance with these policies. And the results show up in this way. Again, all of these policies are available to anyone on OPPD.com at any time. And this shows the relationships, the delegation of authority from the board to the president and CEO, or where not the president and CEO specifically to other roles. So we were looking at board president and chief executive officer relationship, the board OPPD officer relationship, the board outside general counsel relationship, the board internal auditor relationship, the board corporate secretary relationship, and unity of control. And the general findings through the comments were that the relationships between board and various roles are positive, professional, and positive. There were some specific comments on education and advice from legal counsel being good, and the corporate secretary doing an excellent, exceptional. There were a lot of different adjectives all saying that Ms. Tracy was doing a really great job.
You rock.
There were some comments about some additional opportunities for education and discussion regarding industry trends, which I think the board has spent a lot of time, even today, teeing up additional opportunities for education, learning more about industry trends and making that part of what the discussion is here. As you'll know, shortly we're going to be reviewing electronic vehicles today, and there's some other presentations teed up over following months. Also, the board needs to be ever vigilant of ensuring the board acts as a body rather than individually in directing requests through the CEO and corporate secretary or senior management team. That was kind of a summary of comments that really led to unity of control. And following the process earlier, Director McGuire, I'll read unity of control. Only decisions of the board acting as a body are binding on the president and chief executive officer. Specifically in or out of the board meeting, decisions or instructions by individual directors, officers, or committees are not binding on the CEO, except in instances when the board has specifically authorized such exercise of authority. In the case of individual directors or committees requesting information or assistance without board authorization, the CEO must refuse such requests that require, in his or her opinion, a material amount of staff time or funds or are disruptive. Directors shall have full and open access to senior management and other OPPD employees in order to ask questions and receive all information necessary to perform their duties. However, the board is a body, and individual directors will never give direction to persons who report directly or indirectly to the CEO. Board members shall refrain from conducting performance evaluations for any OPPD employee or staff member other than the CEO. What doesn't show up here is the degree of compliance or non-compliance. Actually, I think that's another point, because even in reading through the comments, it did not strike me, although I don't want to fully summarize because this is me making an assumption, that the non-compliance was necessarily like a flashing red. It kind of was, here are some thoughts for consideration. And so it was tempted to capture that at the end here. The board needs to be ever vigilant in making sure that it acts as a body rather than individually. So.
Yeah, on that one. So on that one, and this is just my comment, so this is not the governance committee as a whole, but on that one, when I looked at that, what concerns me is being a member, we're all elected members, and then if a member is asking this or doing this, and that unity of control, and they're steering the company in a different direction, and I didn't even know about it as a director, that offends me as far as what I'm doing for my ratepayer constituents. So I don't feel like you're being undercut a little bit. So I think the unity of control, what I've seen, you know, as when I was chair, now as governance, you kind of look, it's like, well, that does kind of undercut the rest of the group when we have all our staff doing other things that we spend so much time on, these SDs and GPs and all that. So I think that's kind of where I come from on that. And I heard that from a few others. I'm not going to name names of the same thing. So, but it's that was the only one where I see we had a little bit of a where are we going, you know, as far as the BLs go. So that's my opinion.
And I think that there are some situations that there might have been a little bit of micromanaging and almost demanding too much from the CEO, which I think we have given the power to him to say, this is too much, we cannot do this, this is over and above what is required. You know, and that's the control that we also want to give to the CEO to say, nope, that's enough, we can't do any more, we've done as much as we can. This is beyond the means, you know, it's a little bit too much micromanaging. And I think there are some comments in there, if you want to go to the additional comments.
Oh, yeah. There were some additional comments that were verbatims, and they were included. It was hard to determine if they were part of the GP or the BL, but the fact that they didn't really have a home and they were kind of at the end, it seemed important to include these for review.
And I think the unity of control might be number 2, is what that was dealt with.
Yep.
If you can read that.
Kudos to whoever wrote that.
Some directors need to understand the extent of the responsibilities. We need to give management the space and time to run the organization on a daily basis. We do not run the organization, we provide oversight. And whoever did that did a great job. It wasn't me, I wish it were.
Yeah, too.
It was great.
So my only comment on this, if I've learned anything about effective performance evaluation, is that feedback needs to be specific and timely. And if we think about this for us as a job and we're trying to achieve certain things and meet the roles that are outlined in these policies, my question on this unity of control issue, I totally get where it's coming from. And as a relatively new board member, reflecting on certainly the first 6 months or so, it was really hard, and I would say it's still in some cases hard to distinguish between where that line is. Examples, we could cite some examples from earlier today. We asked for financial reports to be presented without cents, right? Minor, probably on the right side of the line, but still, it was a request that you offered that we all just kind of nodded our heads. It wasn't specific. So my request here is that if there are situations when a director is at that line, crossing that line, if we're having issues, we need a mechanism by which to circle back to them and provide some guidance, especially if it's a new board member, so that we can better learn and understand where that line is. Because, I'm sure we're all in this position because we want to do the right thing and do well for the organization, and we all have different depths to which we go, right? And so I don't know if this is the mechanism by which we get feedback for that, I'd say we can do better.
I would say this. I would just be very transparent and open. I did present some information to the governance committee and did have a conversation with the director.
Okay.
Very specifically about that.
Yep.
I'm very keen on anybody needs to have that feedback immediate, right? That they can make that. And so what we have done is very clearly say you can't directly contact the directors directly, right? You have to go very specifically through me or through Kim so that we can identify whether or not we're going to pursue any of the items of that request. And so we've been very direct about that, and I've had that conversation with that director and essentially said, I'll make that determination of what we can provide, and I'll be very clear about what we won't provide.
All right.
So we've to your point, I think it's great, Director Moody, is that we've tried to have that. And again, I think it is our intent to allow some flexibility and growth and understanding of this. And then that's when I went to the governance committee and said, I feel uncomfortable with this. I want to make sure you all are aligned with that direction of what I want to do. And then I had that conversation, and I believe to date that's been of value.
Okay,
So,
I just wanted to make sure we had a mechanism for that.
Thank
So
you.
thank you.
Thank you.
I'm good.
Just to clarify too, when he said directors can't contact directors, he meant staff at OPPD.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
You
below
can all
the
call
below
each
the
other.
VPs.
Below the VPs, yes.
Yeah.
Great.
Oh, that directors, yeah.
I would like to point out some of the additional comments in addition to the second one are all exhibiting, I think, the general tone of what the survey was resulting or showing, and that was really kind of a strength and reinforcement of the board and its discussion that it's having and what it's doing. So overall, there was really consensus between both the BL and the GP, and there was a lot of very positive feedback, again, that was summarized. I know it's sometimes easy when I'm getting surveys to spend a lot of time on a particular comment or a particular point.
Look at the big picture.
But stepping back and taking a look at the big picture, it's very clear that there's consensus from the board regarding these policies and a lot of very positive feedback regarding all of the different policies. And at the end, BL 1, 2, and BL 4 and 5 are both, the monitoring oversight happens to reside within the governance committee. And for BL 3, the relationship, this is a relationship with the internal auditor, falls within the finance, assurance, and audit committee. The report has been submitted, reviewed by governance committee, and emailed out to the FIA. So I believe that this recommendation is good as it stands for the entire committee.
I think that's a really good point. That was in the discussion Friday too, what you brought up. You know, with these are temporary positions that directors fill, and when new ones come in, there's a lot to pick up.
Yeah.
I think what we decided to do is we directed Scott to reach out to who's our guy? Eric Douglas, and kind of make sure what are we doing on onboarding? Because I mean, you're one of the first to actually have an onboarding. Yeah. The rest of us kind of like figure it out as you go, and it's hard. Yeah. So, but like I say, with the elections coming up, you never know who's going to be new. It's very important. So we did think of that, and it's very good. Because you're right, people run for these offices and they want to be actively participating. They don't want to wait 2, 3, 4 years before I figure it out. So we directed Scott to talk to Eric, review our onboarding, because, you know, if we need it, which we may, how that's going to look. So I don't think we did pick a date of when you're going to do that or whatever. Well, that was kind of casual, I know, but I know it's on your agenda.
It was a discussion point, and actually what I'd like to say is that Kim and I have worked with Eric. In fact, as I believe that Director Trinan was actually, as you changed officers this year as well, we've had those connection points, and I think that was helpful. Director Trinan, I don't know if it was helpful.
Christy and Kim have onboarded the heck out of me. I've met with Steve, right, and Kate, and Javier, and Julie.
You're talking about the fire hose?
Well,
it continues, and you know, it's been outstanding. It really has.
It did include Eric Douglas at the very beginning as well, to walk through in details the policy governance and what that means. So I think that's to your point, Director.
Yeah, it's been great.
Yes,
so we are looking at that.
Yeah, that's great, and I would say my experience and reflection on the orientation process echoes what you just described, in that getting into the different parts of the organization and seeing the things and talking with people has been exceptional, right? And that is drinking through the fire hose. I think where I think there's maybe an opportunity is on sort of the board interaction and norms of how the board functions and works, maybe that aren't in black and white, and sort of reading into the policies a little bit and understanding. Like, those are things that I can only get if you and I are sitting having lunch and I'm asking you questions.
Yeah.
They're not things that we're going to articulate in black and white. And so I think there's an opportunity for us to, like, as a board member, my bigger questions weren't about generating assets. It was about how agendas get set and like how the interactions happen between board members and what those social norms are. Because if I don't know what they are, I interject, and all of a sudden it's a bull in a china shop breaking things up, which takes a year or two for me to reconcile.
But that's a good input. So when you're doing that, of course, talk to the newest members and say, hey, what else should we add? So I'm sure Scott
will include
that's
that
a good point
as we evolve.
Well, and I reached out, I believe, to you and Rick about how's it going, and you gave me great feedback, so that's helped, and that's how we got Eric in at the beginning too.
Cool. I will say it would have been helpful to have an overview to say, here are the topics we're going to cover in your onboarding.
Yes.
These are the people, these are the topics, and this is kind of the rough time frame we're going to try and accomplish it. It's been kind of this topic and that topic and this topic, but I recognize how comprehensive it is.
I have that, and you were kind of a special exception, I would say, because you were onboarded so quickly.
Yeah, midstream.
Yeah.
I understand.
So yeah, that's good feedback as well.
You had 5 fire hoses going.
So those are great points of feedback, and Kim and I will take that all under advice.
Yeah, and all the senior managers, I think, are always, obviously, they're very accessible to all of us. And I had a little grief too when I started of, you know, you want to keep on a level and not go down and just walk into a service center and say, hey, I'm, director, what's going on? Because we undercut. And I think that's the thing. You can have these educational conversations. It's just when the direction was being given to them, it's like, well, that doesn't work that way. That's a board direction. So we're good. But anyway, with this, though, these are we looked at our part, so, and then the finance committee, they don't need to look at it, we're ready to vote on these?
I believe so, so I'm just doing a quick, yeah,
We good?
yeah. And we got, the feedback we got had said yes.
Totally good.
All right, so this is on the consent agenda.
Both of these, all three,
approval.
actually. Well, no, two.
No.
And then the SD will be, one will
SD's
be on
next
next
month.
month, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I would just say, I want to thank the board for getting us into this kind of routine and this lead and this kind of board and management practice. I mean, this is pretty important for us. And I think, Craig, you raised this on the front end about how do we go about through this and how do we begin to continually monitor what does that look like. And I think we're finding our pace, finding our speed, finding our rhythm in doing that. And I think that's to the benefit of the organization very clearly. So it's a very thoughtful process. And so I want to thank you all for being patient with us as we kind of work through that. But I think it's a great routine and a great practice that we've developed here.
Yeah,
So
we're in only year 2 of these policies.
That's correct.
If you think of that, we're at the infancy.
Yeah, and I want to thank the senior management that I've met with, because I think everyone's introduced me to some of their senior staff people, which is for me equally important because it gives me a sense of the talent level, the next talent level that's coming up. And it's comforting, but it's informative too. It's very helpful.
Good point. Okay, and then we're going to skip over, I think with that we'll move on. We're going to skip over the corporate officer comp. That's on a closed session that we'll do. I think we're going to integrated marketplace electric vehicles presentation. Tim, you're going to handle that?
Yeah, well, I'm certainly not going to handle it, but I'm just going to do kind of the introduction. Troy, are you doing the first little work on this, or just doing the introduction to it? Yeah, so what we have done over the course of time, we have 3 items that'll be coming to the board in May, June, and July. Certainly, kind of where OPPD is on its EV strategy. We've given you a couple of the presentations previously on where we are on kind of our economic development strategy relative to our integrated energy marketplace. A little bit about where we have been on some planning consolidation and how we're looking at planning a little differently and how we may use energy efficiency and demand side management around that planning. And so Troy has led this initiative very clearly around the organization. And so the next 3 will be EV, non-traditional sources, and then around distributed energy resources and kind of what OPPD's stance and position is going to be on those. I believe I have talked with most of the board members. Effective May 6th, Troy took a new position within OPPD as a director of our transmission and distribution centers and our operation piece. So he fully engaged around that, reporting directly to Mo on that. And so now he's going to be responsible for some of the things that he's recommending. So it'll be very good. So I'm going to turn over to Troy, who's kind of led this full initiative, and then let him introduce the folks that will be presenting. So Troy.
Had I known I had to execute, I might have went a different path on some of this. I just want to start off. So this has been a great team for us. We have approximately 50 people across the organization from different backgrounds, different tenure with the company. And we leverage that group to kind of look at and focus on things that are changing in the utility landscape. And so, and as we look at those and we analyze those, we kind of think about what kind of future opportunities the district may have related to those activities. Today, obviously, we're going to talk about electric vehicles. Tim shared the other items that we're going to be discussing over the next few months. What you'll see here is approximately 16 slides, which is a lot of boiled down information. There was a lot of additional research and education that went on behind the scenes, a lot of outreach. But we tried to get that down to a level that we could really focus on some core items here today. What you'll see is focus less on the fun facts of the technology and really more on the case for having a strategy here at OPPD around electric vehicles. As we walk through this, we did utilize the strategic directives given to us by the board, kind of as those lenses as we were making decisions and looking for paths. So, there was a lot of discussions around the environment, how we plan for some of these new technologies in the future, how costs are derived, and so, what kind of costs and programs and products do you want to have now versus what you might need in the future as you see more adoption take place. With that being said, we have two presenters today. The first one will be Aaron Smith. He's the Director of Operations. He's going to kind of walk through the why did we look at EVs, what we looked at, what did we learn, what does this mean for us for an ongoing strategy. And then at the end of that, Heather Siebken, our new Director of Product Development and Marketing, will kind of provide a deep dive into a pilot program that we have, which we're really excited about. And so especially since that covers a lot of different areas, it covers education. We leverage some partnerships with it to bring our customers some value, a value proposition with some rebates and things of that nature. And then kind of the continued learning that we're going to see from this going forward, which will help us with future products and services. And so with that, I will turn it over to Aaron to get started. And please ask questions as we go through this. We'd like it to be a good dialogue. No need to wait till the end.
All right, good morning, everyone. As Troy mentioned, my name is Aaron Smith. I'm excited to join you here today and talk about our electric vehicle strategy and initiative. So when we started out, what we wanted to do was look at how do we create a strategy for EVs that also supports our customers' needs while also helping to accelerate adoption in our territory. So this was really the mission of our team as we started out.
Aaron, before you move on,
Yes, absolutely.
I have a little heartburn with the word accelerate because I think it presumes that it's our responsibility as the utility to accelerate adoption, where I'm not sure that that's really true. I think that's really up to the car industry. I think we should enable or facilitate adoption, but I'm not sure that, because it changes in how, for me, it changes how you look at this issue. Okay, so I don't believe it's our job to accelerate that adoption. I think we should facilitate and enable. Pick one of the two or pick both. I'm just saying that kind of hit me in the forehead when I read this slide.
I don't know that I fully agree.
Yeah, I think there's accelerate has a different thing. If they have the cars here already and we don't have the backup for it, we don't have it.
So what I would say is let's get to the deal, and I think you'll get to see the meat of what we are using as the word accelerate, whether it's customer education, partnerships, at least things that we can do to maybe drive some of the conversation around this or enable it, and I think the team's perspective maybe accelerate in that regard, which may be in the best interest of OPPD too. So if you would just
I'll
give us the opportunity to roll through, and then we'll see. I appreciate that. I think the answer is coming. So
I high-centered on that one word.
I understand. I understand.
It's a wordsmith. Yeah.
Okay. No, thank you. That's a great question. Like I say, I think we'll address that as we come through here. If not, we can discuss it more at the end. But that is kind of our vision, is enabling it, and through that enabling, it may accelerate at the same time. So kind of taking a look at the EV marketplace, both here in the United States as well as abroad. So a lot of you may or may not be familiar, but Electrify America is the Volkswagen subsidiary that they created as a part of their settlement. If you remember, a couple years ago, they got kind of caught cheating on their diesel emission standards, and as part of that, they had a huge settlement package. One of the pieces with that is to install a network of these superchargers across the country. They've started kind of on the east and west coast, like San Francisco, a heavily densely populated area, Philadelphia, and then they really want to hit all the interstate highways across the U.S. over the next few years. So that's kind of what they're doing as kind of a penalty, but also a really smart business strategy on what they're doing. The second, Tesla, as you're aware, they've built out a pretty robust network of superchargers, and they continue to build that. Locally here, there's one across the river right in Council Bluffs, and we have one down the way in Lincoln. Unfortunately, at this point, we don't have one right in our territory, but they are nearby along I-80. Next, China has committed to account for half of the global EV sales by 2030, and you might ask yourself, well, okay, why do we care about China? Well, what's happened in recent years, China is actually the #1 car market in the world right now, and that's changed within the past 5 years. Prior to that, the U.S. has always been the leader, but around 2012, 2013, China took the lead, and they actually, in the last year of data that we had, they outsold cars by 6 million vehicles across the U.S. So they're pushing for EVs, and they're the global leader. And so along with that, you see, and we have just a couple examples here, but all the major manufacturers of vehicles have plans to either electrify their entire fleet or some portion of their fleet within the next decade. For example, GM plans to offer 20 models. VW is investing $84 billion and will offer 30 electric or hybrid models by 2030. So as you see, kind of no matter what happens in the U.S. kind of political policy climate, the world is really driving this regardless, and you'll see that. Here in the U.S., a little more locally, right now, today, Nebraska has about 600 electric vehicles out of a total of 1.7 million registered. So if you look kind of in our region, we're about typical with our region at this point. What you'll see kind of on the West Coast, obviously, a couple kind of northeast, and then actually Georgia has you might say, well, why is Georgia red kind of in the middle of the southeast? Well, actually, the state of Georgia initially a few years ago had a tax credit at the state level in addition to the federal, which really helped it take off to boost cars, especially with their Atlanta area with traffic and emissions that they have. But they've since repealed that credit and actually replaced it with a tax, kind of in lieu of gasoline tax. And so that's started to slow a little bit, but that's kind of why they're red initially. And even, like you say, even on the West Coast, like with California, it's still 32 electric vehicles per every 10,000 residents. So it's still, in the grand scheme of things, even our heaviest areas, it's still a developing technology. And we've estimated that about 300 EVs are within the OPPD service territory, kind of based on some zip code estimates. And one thing we'll notice with the state of Nebraska is actually, we're only at 600, but it's actually been increasing by about 80 to 100 EVs each year over the past 5 years. So it's getting up there, but it's still very small in total, but it is a growing market. So OPPD for many years has been doing some things with electric vehicles or other emission reducing technologies. As part of our fleet, we have 2 of the Nissan Leafs, which are the total electric models. We also have 4 plug-in hybrids, which would be like your a Chevy Volt or a Ford Fusion has a plug-in model, and we have 4 of those. We also have kind of on your more traditional hybrids like a Toyota Prius. We have 39 of those type of models within our fleet. And then a really cool, exciting technology that we've kind of been testing out for a few years is we have 3 battery-powered bucket trucks that actually powers the bucket itself, not the drivetrain. But what that allows you to do is when you're stopped at a job site, they're able to actually turn off the diesel engine and operate that bucket with a battery. So you're saving all that diesel emission that otherwise on a traditional model you would be using. So we've learned a lot from our fleet, and actually the 2 Nissan Leafs we have are the lowest kind of O&M costs we have for vehicles. Obviously the big advantage for EVs is there's really a lot less moving parts. You're not doing oil changes all the time. You got to rotate the tires and do a few things, but really there's not a whole lot of maintenance with them, and we're seeing that within our fleet here. So one of the things we did early on in our initiative was go out and reach out to our customers and figure out kind of where their thoughts are around electric vehicles. So we had a couple of we did some online focus groups and also some in-person focus groups that were facilitated by a third-party market research firm. And kind of the key themes that we got out of that, for our commercial customers, their really biggest thing was the limited number of models. Several had kind of some catering or delivery businesses, and they said, well, I really need a van to deliver those, and those just really aren't widely available in an EV just yet. Others said, well, I kind of do go out to construction sites, I need a 4-wheel drive. Those aren't exactly there yet. So the limited number of models today was big with our commercial customers. And then also somewhat kind of limited knowledge out there and concerns about the range of the vehicles. On the residential level, it also was kind of that range piece as well as the public charging station. I think a lot of this comes from, for example, I counted the other day, when I drive to work, I drive by 8 gas stations. And so it's I see that in my mind. It's there. I know it's there. I also drive by a few plug-in hybrid charging stations, but you don't notice them. They're not as visible to you. So I think that's part of the kind of the limited public charging is the awareness of that. It's not as visible and big as a gas station, but they are out there. And then the other piece is the upfront costs. They do have EVs at this point. Their base price does have a premium over a comparable gasoline engine car at this point. So that is a little bit of a barrier. So kind of we boiled it down to kind of really four major themes: the customer knowledge and interest in EVs, access to charging, the costs, both the operating and upfront, and then the vehicle performance and availability.
I have a technical question.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is wrong or not, but it used to be that in colder climates that the batteries wear down quicker. Is that true or false?
It is, because of the fact that using your heater in the car actually wears the battery down more than even like using your air conditioner in the summer. So that is true in colder climates. If you're using the heat a lot, it does tend to drain the battery a little bit quicker than on a day you're not.
So
Yeah.
the range is affected with the colder climates.
It is.
Okay.
In the winter
The
here.
size of the battery the batteries are getting more efficient, right? So as that efficiency continues to increase, that helps offset some of those other factors.
Oh, that's good.
Okay. So in addition to our customer outreach, we also did a whole lot of stakeholder outreach, and this is not representative of all the groups that we spoke to, but just kind of a sampling of the type of entities that we talked to. So both kind of vehicle manufacturers, planning agencies like MAPA, Metro Area Planning Agency, other utilities, other, the Nebraska Community Energy Alliance, Builders Association, ChargePoint, and other charging equipment vendors to really kind of get an idea of where we are. So, and like I said, there's a lot of players in the EV space today. One of the interesting groups that we talked with was the Metro Omaha Builders Association, kind of talking with them on what their customers are asking of them, like when they build a new home. And because what we wanted to understand was, are people asking for a special 240 volt service run to the garage for a charging unit? And to date, for most of the builders, they're not really seeing that as a request for their customers. There was one builder that offers that as standard, and that was kind of more of a high-end builder, but they do offer that as standard. But others are, thought it was an interesting idea and some things to think about kind of going forward. But one thing that we did note from them is that the builders do believe that EVs are coming, maybe before some of the other technologies, such as the distributed energy resources and things like that. So they're on board, but it's very early in that adoption piece. Another kind of little fun tidbit, MAPA, or the Metro Area Planning Agency, has plans through some federal grant funding that they were able to get to install 40 charging stations across kind of the Omaha metropolitan area over the next 3 years. And that's working kind of with local municipals like City of Omaha to do that. So there is, like I say, a variety of different grants available, both at the kind of more federal agencies as well as local, and we'll kind of get into that a little bit more. And certainly, the EV manufacturers also offer some programs as well. Yeah.
I'm wondering about EV advocacy, who you spoke with that kind of falls under that umbrella, and the extent to which we talked with owners, EV owners.
We did have some kind of informal discussions with EV owners. We have some employees of EV owners, and then actually I attended myself kind of a event that was put on last fall, an EV event, and just kind of went informally kind of as myself and talked with a few owners to kind of do that informally. When we reached out to the focus groups, that they could have been included. We didn't at this point though do a dedicated EV owner type focus group, but we have talked to them along the way, both internal and then kind of informally at various events.
So you feel like informally you got what you needed for the most part?
Yeah,
okay.
Yep, to kind of get an idea of kind of their charging habits and what they do. And we'll get into that here a little bit more as well.
We have, 3 team members who own electric vehicles and some teams, so their feedback obviously is important.
Yep. Okay.
Yep. And so one of the key themes for this is really there's a lot of opportunities for partnerships out there, both from a grant perspective as well as just a policy perspective to come together and help to promote this. Another thing that we did was we took a look at utility case studies and see what other utilities have done relative to the EV space. And there's been some utilities have partnered with EV manufacturers, for example, with Nissan to offer a rebate at the time of purchase for customers of that utility. And that's been really a successful program for both Nissan and those utility territories to help increase the number of EVs. And what we've seen is also that EV adoption increased where the utility addressed kind of multiple factors, where they looked at kind of a rebate up front in addition to maybe putting out some public infrastructure. But the part behind that is that requires really, really significant investment and maybe a little bit of an unclear payback. And I'll kind of go through some examples to talk through that. One was KCP&L, Kansas City Power and Light, our neighbor to the south, has put in 1,000 charging stations across their service territory, and they've seen good increases in the number of electric vehicles by doing that. They went from 40 to over 4,000 just in a couple of short years. In addition, they had partnerships with Nissan and a few other things. But at the same time, their original plan with those 1,000 charging stations was to take that to their commission and get that put in their rate base and basically earn a return on that. Their state commission, though, did deny them that. So they were unable to do that. So then their shareholders through their equity had to end up funding it. They continued with the program, but they were not able to rate base that as they originally intended. And also Southern California Edison, another example out west, has included some EV infrastructure as part of their overall grid modernization project. So kind of their think smart grid type stuff. But they've also gotten a lot of customer pushback for doing that, of saying, well, this isn't really grid modernization, this is something else. So like I say, some utilities have tried that piece, but it does require investment, and like I say, the return and the payback may not be there. Another key finding was that time of use rates dedicated specifically to EVs have shown really low adoption. For example, Austin Energy offered a specific time of use rate at a reduced kilowatt hour price overnight, and they had a pilot program and opened up to 100 customers, and they actually only had 25 sign up out of their nearly 500,000 total customer base. So really low adoption for that specific. However, we have seen utilities like OG&E down in Oklahoma where they already had a generic time of use rate, obviously because in Oklahoma you get a lot of AC use. I used to live there in Oklahoma City. It's very, very hot. And so they already have an overall time of use rate. And so what they've been promoting it as, okay, you're already on this time of use rate. You've saved money on your summer cooling. Now you can save even more money if you get an EV overnight. You'll get the off-peak price and charge your EV there. So that has been successful, but a dedicated rate has seen more limited success. Also, some utilities are testing programs for both home chargers and commercial, but allow kind of monitoring control of when people charge. And we'll kind of get into some examples of that, but really it can have an impact on the utility if a whole bunch of people are charging at once, and we'll kind of get into some examples there. And then finally, user-friendly websites also help promote the benefits. Another nice thing that OG&E does is they have on their website, you can put in where you live, where you work, what kind of car you have now, what EV you may be looking at, and it'll calculate your total savings. It'll say, your electric bill may go up by X per month, but your overall savings from not buying gasoline will be a net $1,000, for example. So really, really cool stuff for customers that are interested in pursuing that, understanding what the case for their specific use might be. So now we'll kind of take a look at some charging use and economics. And I want to point out that this is a snapshot of today. So what we see today is that 80 to 90% of charging is done in the home. And that's either done through a level 1 charger, which is basically just plugs into your standard AC outlet, 120 volts. Or a level 2, which is your 240 volts, which is like basically like a dryer plug that your charger plugs into, and then you plug that into your vehicle. The charging time difference at the level 1, it's kind of a trickle charge. It can take upwards of 20 hours to fully charge if you're all the way down. The level 2 charger, if you were completely down, would be in the neighborhood of 8 hours. And as far as kind of an impact of load, that level 1 charging is sort of like a hairdryer plugging in. The level 2 is more equivalent to your air conditioner turning on. And that's what we've seen too, is that the level of usage is about equivalent to an air conditioner. We'll kind of talk about that here in a second too. The other 10 to 20% is done at public charging. A lot of most of the public chargers, especially in our area, are level 2, that 240 volt charger. And then there are, like I mentioned with the Tesla and the network that VW is building out, the DC fast chargers, which can charge a car in about 20 to 30 minutes. So really, really fast, but those are, at this point, kind of dedicated to highway use. So kind of looking at an example of kind of our annual revenue that we would see per electric vehicle, and it depends on how much you drive. For this scenario, we looked at driving between 20 and 60 miles a day for your commute, and that would equate to about $600 to $1,000 of additional revenue for OPPD, depending on that. So that's which would be a good thing for all customers, and helps us with kind of development in the area, economic development. And that's equivalent, as I mentioned, to an air conditioner. It's just with this, it's spread out over 12 months, as opposed to your air conditioner load is 4 to 5 months. So it's the same kilowatt hour usage in the year, but just spread out versus all at once. The other thing we looked at was public charger investment, and the thing about that is it has a really, really long payback, 30-year plus. And that's assuming that you're charging for use on that payback. And the thing about this is it's not a 30-year traditional utility asset. It's not a pole or a transformer that you expect to last 30 to 50 years or beyond. And the technologies are changing really fast as well. So that's another thing to keep in mind with this is, today you go up to the station, you park, and you plug in your car. But they're working on technologies where actually you'll just kind of drive up and you'd be able to charge, kind of almost a charging mat, kind of like if you've seen on the newer smartphones that you can just set on there and charge. That's the type of technology they're working on. So that's the key to remember on the public charger investment is it's today's technology, and it's changing really fast. So to keep that in mind, and it does really have a long payback time. And the other thing also to keep in mind, in our territory, the majority of chargers actually have no fee to charge at this point. A lot of them are put in by either kind of retail establishments or hotels for the convenience of their customers, and so they're not really looking at it as a payback for the charge itself, as more of a customer convenience to attract folks in their store. And so again, this is a snapshot of today, but over time, I do think that this model will change. I think as you get more of the self-driving cars, and you could potentially call a self-driving Uber from your phone, as that more takes off, you may not have the same charging at home per se, but more at a centralized kind of commercial charging hub. So we could see this model develop over time. Today it's in the home, and so that's kind of a focus area, but that could change. Like for myself, I have 4 young kids at home. My kids will probably learn to drive. Their grandkids may not. And actually, I attended a utility industry conference earlier this year, and they had as a keynote speaker a futurist, and I really liked what he said, so I'm going to steal it and use it here. But he said that eventually cars will be kind of like horses, right? So like you'll go to a track and you'll pay to drive a car, maybe pay extra for like a manual transmission, if you want the premium package. Whereas like today, people go and they pay to ride a horse somewhere, and they think, oh, this is great, how fun, this is kind of a vacation thing to do. So I thought that was a really cool idea, is that we may get there, on vehicles. That's probably way out in the future, but a really interesting thought. So just that's kind of a backdrop to keep in mind when we're looking at this, is it's really evolving quickly. Yeah.
Cool analogy. So most people aren't charging a fee, and this goes back to a conversation we had maybe a year or so ago about if they do decide to charge, how they do that. It's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, but they can't, if I own a charger and you pull up, I can't charge you based on the actual kilowatt hours, right?
Correct.
So,
yeah.
So how are they charging today?
It depends. Some of them have a charging fee, like a $2 fee, and that gets you.
About the state or outside the state?
State.
Within the state, yeah. A couple of the stations that do charge will have a flat fee, like $2 for up to an hour, like on a level 2. Or there's one, we do have a fast charger in the Ashland area, and they charge $8 for a charge, which is basically there for a half hour. So it's up to that owner to charge, but yeah, they cannot directly charge on a kilowatt hour basis, but they can come up with a fee structure that's sort of equivalent to that. And correct me if I'm wrong, there's nothing that prevents them from charging by the hour. They just can't charge by the kilowatt hour.
Yeah.
So
and I would tell you that the NPA has a committee that's looking at this too, on what kinds of legislative changes should we make, could we make, one to facilitate maybe a better solution for those that want to provide these services.
Yeah.
This is really was meant for, I have 8 apartments in this building, and I'm going to sub-meter them and charge them not what the utility's charging me, but I'm going to charge them twice that. Right. So they were trying to prevent that kind of a situation. This is kind of one of those, technology is driving some different thoughts and how we would use that, and so I don't think the utility is trying to stop that, but we have some statutory things we probably are thinking about changing in the near future.
And in the interim, Steve, they can come and seek a waiver from us in order to have that ability to do that? Did I recall that correctly?
You know, it's honestly, it has been more of a power review board issue
okay.
than an OPPD issue, although Tim's correct that our service regulations preclude people from reselling electricity. So it's a little bit of both, okay. but we've had our power review board looking at these EV stations as well. To your question as to a waiver, I don't know if anyone has approached us for that. My sense is that OPPD, because of initiatives like this, would probably be amenable to that sort of a discussion, but there's some other things to work through.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So now we'll take a look, kind of what's the supply side impact or the generation side impact for EVs. And we ran several different scenarios, but we're highlighting one here because I think it's interesting. And this assumes we get up to 150 electric vehicles in our OPPD territory. Remember, we're at 600 or 300 in OPPD today. But what you'll see, kind of typical, so kind of our typical winter load profile, a spring and a summer. And what you'll notice is it adds about 50 megawatts to our peak, kind of in this scenario, like on our peak summer load. Which is where it starts to kind of get significant to where you may have to do something from a supply side, look at new units or new contracts, things to get that. But what you also notice is it is largely coincident with our evening system peak is when you really start to see it take off. And so although we don't see impacts at the very, very macro system level, we do see some local impacts potentially on the distribution system. And so I'll step through a little scenario here. This is actually based on the transformer at my home. So it's 9 homes in the area. I live in the Millard area, about a 30-year-old house. And so what we did is kind of under the base scenario on this 50 kVA, which is our size of transformer. Just today, we're running at 100% of that unit nameplate of the transformer. And that's okay, and actually we have units that run much above 100%. Kind of the theory behind it is they're designed to run at 100% kind of flat out all the time. But if you're able to run over, assuming you actually dip below and get cooling time, because really the life of the transformer is based on the insulation life, which is basically a function of heating. And the insulation itself, not to get too deep, but it's just paper in oil. And over time it can break down if that heating occurs. And so what you see as you start to add up to 4 homes with an EV, basically on my block, you'd really get to push up there. And knowing that this is kind of coincident with that evening peak, or even if it's shifted into the later evening hours, you may not be able to get that cooling on the transformer, so we may see some issues with local loading. So one of the things that we could do is to look at what are ways to either incent behavior or kind of control charging patterns to optimize that within the neighborhood. And we may, and this is probably pretty futuristic, but we may be able to optimize actually at the transformer level, because different transformers in different neighborhoods may look completely different, even if they have the same number of EVs, just based on the factors of the house size, how close they are together. And certainly based on neighborhoods as well. We have some older historic areas of town that was designed well before central AC. And so, that's now been added, and so those systems may be running a little bit tighter than those that are designed later years with air conditioners in mind. And then again, as air conditioners have become more efficient, like my home's at 30 years old, so it's not on its original AC anymore. That new one is much more efficient than the old one it replaced. So we may have more space to play with in some neighborhoods than others. So we may get down to almost the neighborhood or transformer level with our optimization.
Talk a little bit about the methods, for off-peak, incentives or whatever, that would require us to do time of use? Which would be
could, or it could
EMR
be
expenses there?
A program, for example, what we have today kind of with our air conditioner control programs, with our Cool Smart or Nest programs. It could be a program like that where a customer could let us control when they charge, or a lot of the chargers are actually really slick. So unlike an AC where you have to kind of totally cut it off, you can actually just reduce the draw to say 50%. So that's one option, is we could just reduce the draw, say between 5 p.m. and 8 p.m. and then put it back up to full. There's a lot of different options out there, and that's one of the things that we really want to dig into and study and get some data. And we'll have an exciting program that Heather will talk more about too, of where we'll be able to get in and get that data. But yeah, that's exactly it. There's a lot of different methods you can use, but it doesn't at all have to be a rate. It can be more of an incentive or other type program. And so here's kind of the areas of focus that we see through our initiative, and I'll kind of step through some specific action items that are in progress or that we'll be pursuing here in the near term. One is developing that customer education. As we saw through our survey work, and our customers are no different than the national surveys we've looked at. Just the education and awareness is a really, really big deal. I've noticed here, like if you watch TV, like especially during the local news, it's tons of car commercials, but almost no EV commercials. But actually, where I've traveled a little bit to other parts of the country, I've actually seen some EV commercials. So there's much more awareness in other areas. So I think that's good, and we want to be behind that. We feel as the utility we're a good resource for providing information or directing them to the right sources to get their questions answered. If we're unable to answer it, we want to be that resource for them. Our 2018 pilot, again, that Heather will talk about here in a minute, but this is going to be a really exciting program. We're partnering with Nissan to offer an upfront discount on a vehicle purchase. We're also working through a grant with NCA and Nebraska Environmental Trust to offer an additional upfront, a rebate after the fact. And then also a charging pilot. We want to do a home charging pilot where we'll be able to monitor the charging patterns and behaviors within our territory and see what that looks like. So as we know what that looks like, then we can look at how to design programs in the future to really optimize that and get the most benefit for the utility as well as all of our customers. There's a lot of opportunities for leveraging EV grants out there, and we plan to do that. In addition to the VW settlement where they're picking where they put chargers, they're actually giving money to each state. And Nebraska is getting about $12 million as part of that settlement. And up to, I believe, 10% of that is going to be planned to be spent on EV charging infrastructure. So about $1 million worth of grants available, and there'll be a lot of entities besides OPPD vying for that money. But that's just one example of an opportunity. There's also some things at the federal level through the air quality standards and ongoing things through Nebraska Environmental Trust. So a lot of opportunities, and we plan to take advantage of those. One thing we're planning to do, we were able to obtain, we do have a level 2 charger available that we can install. And so we'd like to do that kind of in the downtown area here, kind of near Energy Plaza. Again, as both a convenience to our customers as well as gathering data on some potential charging patterns kind of in this downtown area.
Aaron,
yes?
If you're thinking about putting level 2 chargers that charge in 30 to 60 minutes, it doesn't make as much sense for me to put that. Well, maybe I'm thinking level 3 charger.
That's
level 2 is kind of an all day. So office buildings, apartments, that's perfect. That's
what we're thinking. And there's been a few with. We've had a lot of discussions with City of Omaha and their parking director, and they're putting some through the MAPA grants in some parking garages here downtown. And again, you pay to park in the garage, but they don't actually at this point have a fee to charge itself. That could evolve over time as the market evolves. But that's kind of where it's at. Yeah, today this is just a kind of, you need you're downtown running some errands or you're here for the day, you need a little boost. That's kind of the idea of the level charge, and that's why that seems to be the case. The thing about the level 3s, why they're mostly along the highway, they're really, really expensive, like $50K plus for those. And so those are really just along the highways at this point, just due to cost. So one of the things we've also done, which is exciting, and you'll be hearing from her in just a minute, but we've assigned a lead role. Heather Seepkin, our Director of Product and Services, and her team will be heading up kind of the ongoing electric vehicle effort here at OPPD. And again, as I mentioned, we've done some things with our fleet over the years, and we plan to continue to do that as vehicles age and they're replaced. Now, not at this point where the EV technology is, not every type of vehicle we use can be an EV, but there's certainly some great uses. Some of the pool cars that people run between meetings or out with meeting customers and things like that would be some good examples, and we will continue and plan to do that as we evaluate our fleet going forward. The battery-powered buckets are really neat, and we'll continue to evaluate those. As, like I said, they don't work for every type of job, but they do work for some, and so that's a great thing, and we'll continue to do that. Kind of the next two are kind of go hand in hand of tracking and monitoring the distribution system impacts that I mentioned, as well as that piloting, eventually get to where we're piloting charging control. Initially, we're planning to just kind of monitor at this point, but the technology is there within the chargers to provide a control aspect. And then finally, the commercial charging and fleet programs. We think this is going to be a really hot area in coming years. It's a little bit slow right now just because of the models available, but as you see more, like say, electric vans, electric trucks, things like that, become more readily available, we'll really see this take off, and we'll be able to be in that space to help our commercial customers that want to go that route and convert their fleets to be able to do that. And then finally, one thing that we want to look at is monitoring the vehicle to grid technology. So this is actually where when a car is plugged in, it could actually push back power to the grid from that battery. And I think you'll see this take off. A lot of the vehicle manufacturers are, say this is there today, and it is. A lot of it is doing within their home. So like if you have a power outage at your home, you could power some appliances for a short period of time off of your battery. And so I think we'll start to see that. Eventually, we can get where we'll push it back to the grid. The only thing is it's batteries on wheels, so you never exactly know when or where they're going to be. So it's a little different than having a fixed battery that you can count on, but there's certainly a value to that resource. It's just that's one thing we'll have to kind of evaluate as we go and understand people's behavior, charging patterns, when they're parked, when we could leverage that type of technology. But that's a really exciting thing for the future. And so with that kind of concludes my part. Are there questions specific to this before I pass it over to Heather?
So I just want to kind of go to Mark's comment, or Director Trainan's comment about acceleration. This would be how we are describing how we want to accelerate in the market, are these items that we just talked about, right? So it's just to frame our definition of providing kind of acceleration of this technology in the market. This is how we're describing it today, and then you'll hear specifically about the pilot that Heather and her team are putting together. So
yeah, and I don't want to give the impression that I don't support EVs, because I'm an advocate. I love it. Okay, I have one, and I think they're awesome. But I just think, as our function is really to enable, and if we can find partnerships with developers, apartment owners, malls, whatever, to put our product there and get a rate structure that makes sense. I don't like 30-year plus paybacks, but a rate structure that makes sense for the utility, okay. But I think this thing's going to get adopted because the car offerings are going to be great. There's going to be huge competition, lots of really cool cars coming out. I mean, Jaguar's coming out with them, and everybody's coming out with them, and they're really very interesting vehicles. A lot cheaper than Tesla. Okay, and the Leaf is improving its range. I think up to 200 miles now from 100. So there's a lot of potential. I just want to make sure that our position in it is appropriate.
Yeah. And I think as we've talked about here, and the team was, they've looked at folks that have done significant investments, as they said earlier on, significant investments in the infrastructure And I think what we're saying, that's not our job to put a electric charging station next to a Buc-ee's or to someplace else, and because that's not where the value and the benefit is for us. Somebody will pick that market up when the saturation gets to a level where they believe it's a positive return for them. So
well, it'd be like hydrogen filling stations.
Correct.
That's why we focus so hard on the payback piece, because we were hearing a lot of utilities going out and putting these in, and they said, well, what is the payback? What does that look like? Doesn't mean that there won't be a payback there someday. We don't know. But
Kansas City Power and Light puts in 1,000 of them without having the rate established.
Yep.
And so I assume they're just giving it away.
Stakeholders.
I mean, that's,
foot the bill on that.
Right.
Well, yeah, they're giving it away, and their shareholders are paying the price,
Right.
so.
Right.
So as we looked at this, we really paid attention to our resourcing. So what does it take for OPPD to do some of these activities? Are we spending a lot of money? Are we not? Is it a little bit upfront to work to get education in place?
And I think it's a great project. I think it's a great effort. My caution is that the technology's changing so fast.
We would
that
agree.
a year from now, 2 years from now, it may look very different. And I don't know that anybody's standardized the plug, okay? I have a converter kit of different plugs that came with my car, so I can plug into all these places.
Wouldn't it be nice to have a standard?
So it'd be nice to have a standard.
Like a USB.
Yeah, like a USB. But no, I applaud the effort. It's a great effort. And I'm glad we're thinking about it, considering how we approach it.
Yeah, we're not ready for the business case yet, is that right? Or will we talk about the business case the next presenter?
We're going to give you the pilot moving forward and what that looks like.
And as important as the case for OPPD to maybe stand alone provide chargers, the distribution system is another cost that we need to understand and get in front of. As neighborhoods start putting in their own chargers, how do we fund that?
Right, and that's one of the things that we want to pilot with this potential for charging control or incentives to understand that piece. Is that a more viable option than saying going out and upsizing that transformer? You know, we'll look and make the comparison and that cost for the business cases, and like I say, that's what I mentioned with the 30-year payback on the infrastructure too. Is with grant funding, we're able to significantly reduce that, and so you may see us do some things with that or other public-private partnerships and things like that. But yeah, we've determined, you know, it's not in our interest to go out and do a widespread thing like KCPL did. It just the economics aren't there for us yet.
So I'm not advocating we do that, but this is, I think, an important time to remind us that more often than not, when we make these decisions and calculations, it's based on the financial modeling and the payback, and some consideration, obviously, for the reliability of the system and that impact. We have several other strategic directives that should help us sort of guide these decisions, without naming any or all of them. So it's clearly we know that affordability, reliability are really, really important to our customers, but there are other factors that play into how we sort of scope this. Appropriate is, I think, a good word that you used, scoping it in an appropriate way so that it sort of allows those tensions to exist in a productive way.
Sure, I agree.
Well, I think what we're going to show you is something where I think we can put a stake in the ground and say we're really leading the way, certainly in Nebraska, on what we're wanting to do in this pilot to get better information, better knowledge, to put together a broader business case of what that might look like, but not put us in a position where we are hurting or harming other ratepayers and customers in the process. So maybe we'll have Heather come up and begin to dazzle us with her work. So,
no pressure.
Nice job, Aaron.
Good luck.
Nice job, Aaron.
Thank you, Aaron.
All right. So I am Heather Siebken. I know I've met a few of you, of the directors before, not all of you, but I joined OPPD in December as the Director of Product Development and Marketing. So this is one of the first projects I've had the pleasure of jumping in sort of at the tail end of a lot of the research, so I have a lot of friends that I may call on should I need it. But I'm excited to kind of show you here what we're planning on doing for the pilot. And maybe even giving a little bit of insight for things that could come after this pilot. So I want to start off with just kind of defining what is the objective for the pilot, and most importantly, because as you've heard in Aaron's presentation, we can go a lot of different directions with this. You know, there's home charging, there's public charging, there's fleets, and, you know, everything. Like, we could be everywhere, but we don't necessarily have the resources to be everywhere at one point in time. So what we did is kind of, we drew a box and said, all right, where are we going to start first, and then where are we going to go next? So the pilot really has a box around the residential market and the home charging and being able to study the behaviors there. So this pilot really is a means of us collecting data to make a very informed decision on what we'll do in the residential market moving forward. You know, do they have an appetite for the utility to be involved? What is it that they're looking for from us to offer them? Where do they want us to be when it comes to offering something around the home chargers? So that's, like I said, that's kind of what is our primary goal, what's inside the box for us. I think, though, it's, you know, important to also note that there is a number of, like, maybe secondary objectives that we want to achieve through this. And again, kind of lending hand in hand to what Aaron just presented around some of our top customer concerns in those areas that we can actually influence. So, you know, through this pilot, we definitely want to provide awareness and education and just increase that education around electric vehicles, their purpose, you know, the benefit of them. We want to reduce some of the anxiety around costs that are, you know, associated. There's, you know, a misperception of these electric vehicles are just too expensive. And again, as we have just heard, even with our OPPD's own fleet experience, there's some of the least expensive cars that we have to maintain. So how can we educate our customers on that? Helping increase the adoption, you know, just for a good, cleaner environment. That's obviously one of our goals as well. This is also an opportunity in the pilot to collect some actual ownership details so that we can maybe do a little bit more informative outreach in the future. So there's, again, when we come out of this pilot, we don't know what the decision will be. You know, do we need to inquire with some actual owners to understand, you know, their feelings around a time of use rate, their participation on that? Or have we been able to determine that those type of rates maybe are not necessary, and we need to, you know, we need to figure out a way to grow adoption with the non-EV owners? So this will give us the opportunity to find out who they are and speak to them in the future if we need to do that. Build and leverage relationships. So, is, again, you just kind of heard in that last part of the presentation from Aaron, is we are working with a lot of partners, I guess you could say, in the industry here, but it's expensive. You know, there's a lot of cost around putting in some of these public charging stations, but there is a lot of grants and partnerships out there that we can certainly leverage for the utility to be out there offering it, but maybe not necessarily absorbing the entire cost. We want to reinforce our dedication to environmental stewardship, and then obviously just increasing our customer satisfaction by having yet another product offering for them. Yeah.
Maybe you'll answer this in the next slide, but the gathering and understanding behavior information, so on and so forth, are we really only going to be able to get that information from those that are going to purchase the chargers and adopt after, or are we dipping back into the 300 in our current service territory that already have them?
Great question. So what we're hoping to do is we're gonna start right out of the gate here in June with those who are going to be purchasing moving forward. But through that, we're working with ChargePoint, and we are gonna see this in a second. That is the vendor that we're using, because that's who can give us the data back. To somehow, they can't give us ownership details, just like the DMV won't give us ownership details. But can we partner with them so they can send a message or communication out to some of our EV owners right now who already have the right kind of charger and say, you know, OPP is offering this program. Yes, you've already, you know, purchased your charger, but they'll let you in if you agree to send their data.
Got it.
So that'll probably come second to the next part, like shortly after, but second.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So gave you kind of, like said, what's the scope, what's our box that we're going to play in. So here's really the components of the pilot. We are anticipating going live or going out to market here in the next month, so within June, probably the first or second week of June. We're still finalizing a couple of the details. Ideally, our target date is actually June 4th, but the second part, which is I'll talk through, could come just a week later. So the two components, probably the most important one is this first one here, which is really an incentive for them to purchase that EV charger. So this is the home charging station. So we have been working with NCEA to co-fund. They have a grant that was available that they're exclusively working with us on, and we are going to give a 50% match to that. So we're going to end up with $500 rebate back to each individual customer who purchases one of these chargers. So they'll have to come to OPPD.com, they'll have to purchase the charger through one of our affiliate links, they'll have to sign off on sending their data back to us and register that charger, and then we can incentivize them since they're sharing their data with us. The grant was written, so if you look into this further, you'll see that the grant was written to only incentivize those in Douglas County. Again, NCA was taking the approach of, where do we need to reduce emissions most in the state of Nebraska, and Douglas County was obviously the highest on that list. But because we are matching 50%, it allows us to open it up to all of our 13 county district.
Certainly Douglas County from the greatest mobile emission sources in the region, very clearly. So this ties very keenly with that.
Absolutely. And, just for some additional insight and support around it, when looking at where the EV adoption is growing the fastest and where those 300 cars are located now, 75% is Douglas County, 15% in Sarpy, and then the rest is everywhere else. So there's certainly, I understand their reasonings for writing the grant the way they did, but it's good that we can offer it to all of our customers. So that's probably the most important, like I said, because that's what's giving us the data that we need to make those informed decisions. The second part kind of really ties into how can we help them, educate them, and how can we help them around those costs of ownership where there's a little bit of anxiety. So these are definitely opportunities of timing and individuals or organizations that are offering incentives right now that we can help, just kind of push them in the direction maybe a potential electric vehicle owner is not aware of them. We have been talking a lot with the Nebraska Car Dealership Organization as well as with corporate Nissan, who both often said, when individuals are on the car lots, they might consider electric vehicle for a short minute, but they don't necessarily realize that there's all these discounts available to them, so then they just look at the price of the car. They don't necessarily have enough education or knowledge about the car, and they immediately just go, all right, now I'm going to go over to these gas-powered ones instead. So the second part is connect to those savings. How can we get that out there for them? So we've got a couple of options of what we'll connect them to. So the first one is through that same grant that is offered through NCEA. They have a grant to offer up to $4,000 back to consumers who purchase a new electric vehicle. This can be any dealership. This is also written, though, that it has to be registered in Douglas County. So we can send them in the direction of NCA to apply for this grant and receive some money back again after the purchase of that car. We can also inform them that if they choose to purchase a new Nissan Leaf, specifically if they want to, a little bit more specific in the manufacturer, if they show proof of OPPD, that they're an OPPD customer, so show their OPPD bill. We also will have a flyer and a fleet authorization code that they can provide. They will get $3,000 off the purchase of that Leaf right there at point of sale. So not a rebate, it just happens at the time of purchase of the car. Those, in addition to those two, there's a third one, which is just the federal tax credit that's available right now. And we'll just educate them again. This is up to $7,500 per owner. There is, it depends on the make and model of the car and where that particular manufacturer is and their goal. So we can't ever guarantee it is $7,500. It ranges between $2,500 and $7,500. And last I heard is that Toyota's getting close to capping out on their amount. So this, like I said, it's an educational standpoint. It's us to be able to kind of push them in the direction of where they can go find some of these dollars available to them. They can put any of these on top of each other. So if you do choose to purchase a Nissan Leaf, you could still go get the $4,000 NCA grant and still talk to your tax advisor about up to $7,500.
You know why it's only Douglas County?
Yep, so this, just like the chargers, the goal was, the way they wrote the grant, or the purpose behind them, or their grant, was to reduce emissions. And so what they did was focus on where is the strongest, you know, opportunity for us to do that, and it was in Douglas County.
Okay. Their grant is through, is it an NET grant?
It is. Yep, NET. Yeah.
And is the 3,000, is that just Nissan giving a discount?
Yes.
So
I think
none of
Nissan Leaf's done that before.
Yeah, Nissan actually partners with
been
quite a
having-
few utilities across the United States to offer this kind of promotion. So we're certainly not the first there, admittedly. They used to even have a larger rebate that was available, but yeah, they do it right there at point of purchase.
Okay.
Absolutely. And, you know, just to kind of, I wanted to piggyback a little bit on the comment, you know, we are already in conversations with NCA about next year's grant and how we want to open that up and broaden it beyond Douglas County and maybe even beyond just these two offerings. You know, this is, you know, so what I'll say is while this pilot starts in June, immediately after it starts, you know, my team comes back together to figure out what's the next thing we're going to try, what's the next thing we're going to pilot. And that could be whether it's later this year or early next year, but what is it? You know, now do we want to try to test something on, you know, commercial charging? Do we workplace charging? You know, really, where is it that we want to go? Fleet conversion. So we have already started those conversations and how we can utilize our partnership with them, as well as some other grant opportunities that are available to assist us in some of these program goals.
Might be, or do you have a limit on the amount of people that can get the rebate?
Yeah, great question. So with the charger, we have a limit. Well, they both have a limit. So with the charger, we'll be able to reach about 240 individuals.
Okay.
And then with the car rebate through NCA, the 4,000, it has a limit of 50 individuals. And then the 3,000 is unlimited, so as many people who want to go buy a Leaf, they can. And then obviously, like I said, I kind of talked through the federal tax credit. It's limited based on where the manufacturer is, which is why they have to speak to a tax advisor on that.
Okay.
So I could imagine a person who would be interested, know that they are in a year or two going to be ready for a new electric vehicle,
right?
But they're still locked into a lease today.
Yep.
And they may look at this and say, you know what, I'm gonna take advantage of the rebate on the charger today,
right?
Because there's a rebate and it may be limited. Any concerns? I mean, we don't get the data we need in the short term, but are we putting? We're not connecting the two. We're not making a requirement that you're only buying a charger if we know that you've got an EV?
Yes, they have to have the electric vehicle in order to get the rebate for the charger.
Okay.
So you can't have one without the other.
Got it. Okay.
And that's a requirement of the grant. So, I mean, OPPD supports it, but it's a requirement of the grant.
The other thing that I would say, you know, we've talked a little bit about how their grant is Douglas County centered, and the desire in the district to be to offer these programs throughout our entire service territory. Right. I think there's a balance to strike there, though, right? Because the reality is, from a mobile emission standpoint, the reality is the air is not as clean in Omaha as it is elsewhere in the service territory.
Right.
We were close to non-attainment, I think, a couple of years ago. There is merit to us sort of stepping back and saying there's a compelling reason to allow these rebates to really be centered on Douglas County.
Right.
I know that's dicey, maybe not politically savvy.
Right.
But that's really where, like, from a pollution standpoint, that's where the problem is.
And hence why they wrote the grant the way they did.
Yeah.
You're picking on the pollution issue. I'm just talking about fairness to all customers.
Totally get it. Yep.
So I'm not arguing. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
You know, this was definitely something that we discussed quite a bit internally. You know, how do we feel about partnering, you know, on a grant that has limited capability? we couldn't change the terms of the grant, is what I'll say, and we didn't necessarily want to penalize those in Douglas County just because it wasn't available to our other customers. But again, I think that's why, when we look at doing something like this moving forward and working with NCA or NET, and in fact, we're having conversations with the Department of Environmental Quality too about upcoming opportunities with them, is how can we expand it in the future to be all encompassing for our entire district.
And one of the other things, Director Movie, is Chris, who's a professional grant writer, is moving over into our team and so forth, so that we can put a formal grant strategy together.
Cool.
And
yeah, this strikes me as CMAQ funding. Like that's what is CMAQ? Congestion mitigation and air quality, something like that.
That sounds right.
Close enough.
And we have to realize this is only 250 vehicles. It's 250 chargers. This is a pilot. And if you can do a pilot, it's probably better to do it in a confined space, in a controlled space, rather than the entire area. Then it'll be a little bit more
So you said we've got limited budget. Do we have limited time frame for the pilot too? Is it stopping at a certain time?
For the grant dollars through NCEA, those would need to be used up before the expiration of the grant, so April 31st of next year.
Okay.
30th, sorry. If I have
Of
the right days in the month,
2019?
but 2019.
2019,
Yep.
okay.
And then they start a new, so that they're not calendar year annual grant cycles.
So part of the conversation around this accelerated word was, how can we move in a year from 80 to 100 to 250?
Right.
Right, without significantly having cost subsidized across all of our customers. How do we go about doing that? And one, when you begin to do that, then you begin to have dealers think about it differently. You begin to have the communication around it, the stories around it, the media around it, the wire story around it. Right. We begin to talk about it at large customer meetings, about commercial opportunities around it, and you begin to have the dialogue that, we didn't have that arrow in our quiver before, right. and now we do.
Now we do.
Right? And so that becomes, I think, really advantageous for us as OPPD, but also the community as a whole. So.
And something flying around me, sorry. Promise, I'm not going crazy up here. We want to grow, but keep in mind the pilot, going all the way back to Aaron's presentation of, where is it that we have concern, and it's that localized, stress in the neighborhoods, right? And is there going to be a concern around the reliability of the product we provide them of energy? Yeah. And so we want to grow, but we need to be careful about not growing too fast at the same time. So I think having these caps, up to 250 chargers, up to 50 cars, it's going to allow us to accelerate without just completely exploding. And if you're kind of wondering how that imbalance of that works, why is there 50 cars and 250? It's to the point of we can go after existing EV owners for chargers and charging data. It doesn't have to just necessarily be a new car owner. So it does allow for a higher amount of those. I think it'll be very easy for us to exhaust the $4,000 rebate, the 50 cars, knowing that our particular area has grown around 100 cars a year, and this is 50. I think the around 240 cars that we can offer the charger to, I think we'll get there, but it probably will take us definitely a longer period of time, maybe all the way up until when that grant expires. So this is, like I said, this is just the two components that we're going out with first. There is certainly more to follow. Like I said, we're already engaging in those conversations now, not only internally, but we're starting to talk to, externally some of these departments that have grants available to them. This will help us find out who our EV owners are, maybe even start engaging with them and in conversations with them about what they would like to see next from us. Now you have an electric vehicle, now you have a home charger. What is it next you would like to see from OPPD? Perhaps they want a certain rate structure, perhaps they want to see OPPD involved with more public charging opportunities, and this is what we'll have to find out in the future. So like I said, we're going to go live in June. We're targeting June 4th. You'll start to see things through some of our marketing and communications avenues. So obviously we'll utilize a lot of our standard avenues that we do today through social media, the wire outlets, things like that. I just want to point out that while we are promoting and connecting them to financial incentives towards the purchase of a car. OPPD certainly doesn't want to appear like we're trying to sell cars. So we're going to be really thoughtful about how we're communicating there and how we're partnering even with like the dealerships on that marketing. So you may see us, you know, really co-marketing with some of the dealerships or being present at the dealerships, doing some drive and learn events. Again, through talking to these individuals, what they've advised us is the best place to get their attention is on the lot. If they're searching for it, that's great. If they run across an ad while they're checking their Facebook, that's great. But really grabbing their attention while they're at the lot, which is letting the car sales people do what they do best, and we're just kind of there saying, hey, should you choose to go down this road of purchasing an electric vehicle, here's some ways that OPPD can connect you or help you on that purchase. And that is it for me, unless anybody has some more questions.
About the VW settlement and everything, it's $10 million that Nebraska gets?
I think that's
12 million?
I think it's 12.
How is that being divided up? Is it going to be, this is just a one-year pilot that we're getting from the NCEA that's given, ones that's handling that, and how, are they going to do this over a yearly? Is this going to be, a certain amount of years, or how does this exactly work?
So it is the intent of NCEA to go and apply for this grant, maybe modified, but a grant towards electric vehicle promotion annually and every year. In addition to that, Aaron and I actually meet with the Department of Environmental Quality, who is the holder of the VW $12 million. And so we have been meeting with them monthly in collaboration with a couple of the other utilities here in Nebraska to decide how to allocate that 12 million fairly and efficiently. So while they're sort of tied together, they can also be viewed as separate avenues for us to go and get resources and partnerships to help with the electric vehicles.
So is any of this pilot money part of that $12 million is my question. Right now, that's not even on the board yet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We're also having a discussion at the NPA board of how can we promote public power across the state through that grant and so forth. So there's going to be a lot more information coming through on that.
Just to clarify too, that the VW settlement, only 10% of that 12 million is directly related to EVs.
Yep.
The other 90% is promoting other technologies, natural gas powered buses, for example. A lot of different stuff, irrigation technologies, different technologies on emission reductions. Not just
electric vehicles.
But
right.
A portion of it is for EVs.
But none of that is in here right now.
No.
Okay. That's what I wanted to.
Question about Nissan.
Yeah.
There are other manufacturers, they're selling electric vehicles as well. If they came to us and said, we want some of that hot action as well, are we...
We would certainly consider partnering with them. So one of the things that we are working on right now is actually a communication that's going to be sent through the Nebraska Dealership Association. And I know I'm shortening them. They've got like 8 letters in their acronym. So they are going to send a letter on our behalf to all of the dealerships advising just that. Nissan was ready. And, they were available for us to start this right now. So again, crime of opportunity, I guess, or timing. But should they want to partner with us to help promote their vehicles, we're all ears.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you.
Good stuff. I like it.
Can we introduce the team members? Yes. There were so many people that involved.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Krista Vlasic is our
Stand up, Krista. Is our what now?
That's our grant administrator.
Okay.
So she handles grants for all of us. Courtney Polk, who's in our operations analysis group, and she was my co-lead for EVs from our IEM core team. Mike Donahue, who's the manager of our fleet, and Al Wunderlich, who's in charge of our research, and then Jim Christ, our director of key accounts, customer sales. Thank you.
Oh, and Kate Thomas is on the team as well.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Big team. Thank you.
Thank you. Good work. Exciting.
Yeah.
Good job.
Closed session, and then we'll go grab some lunch.
And then we're going to grab some lunch and then come back. Okay. So, Tim, you start on this one.
We're doing it
session at this time, which is 12:24, for a discussion regarding an update on community solar contract discussions, pricing, a security briefing, and a corporate officer performance review of President and CEO Timothy J. Burke, which includes a discussion on compensation matters. With respect to the update on the community solar project, a closed session is necessary to discuss information from bidders and other information that is considered a trade secret and/or proprietary and competitive information, which, if disclosed, would give advantage to business competitors. With respect to the security briefing, a closed session is necessary to obtain a confidential briefing on protective measures and strategies to protect against physical threats to the district's assets and personnel. This information pertains to the protection and security of public property and may include vulnerability assessments or specific unique response plans which are intended to prevent or mitigate criminal acts, the public disclosure which would create a substantial likelihood of endangering public safety or property. With respect to the corporate officer performance review, a closed session is necessary to prevent needless injury to the reputation of the individual involved, and the senior manager has not requested a public meeting. So,
second the motion.
The motion is second.
May I have a vote?
Gay.
Yes.
McGuire.
Yes.
Lyons.
Yes.
Moody.
Yes.
Brennan.
Yes.
Motion carried.
The motion to go in closed session has passed. This closed session will be limited to an update on the community solar project, a security briefing, and a corporate officer performance review and compensation matter. No votes or board action will be taken during this closed session.